Chapter 738. The power of the Tao of music contained within the coin was extremely unique. Not only could it increase one's intent, it could also cleanse and strengthen one's soul. It could be said that it had both the mermaid tears and the illusion god wine, but the effect was even stronger. Within the world of stars, the sun, moon, and stars spun in a profound way, and they contained the laws of the universe. The music of the Tao of music seemed to have penetrated through the reincarnation time and space, pulling at one's heart and soul, making one enter a state of emptiness. In just a few breaths' time, Zhao Feng felt as if he were a deity, and his sole intent was clear, and had the effect of removing impurities and purifying it. One had to know, Zhao Feng's soul was already on the same level as an emperor's, and now that it had been refined, it was as transparent as glass. Of course, the increase in intent was what moved Zhao Feng. In this short period of time, Zhao Feng's soul intent had reached a perfect level. Everything in his senses was extremely clear, and the intent of heaven and earth appeared right in front of him. This is the perfect intent that only emperors can have. Zhao Feng sighed in his heart. However, just like the illusion god wine, the effect was only temporary. The illusion god wine was very helpful to those below the void god realm, but after becoming a king, the intent of the soul would change, and it would be countless times stronger than the origin core realm. Therefore, even if the bronze coin was 10 times stronger than the illusion god wine, it wouldn't be able to make Zhao Feng instantly break through. Shua. Zhao Feng's consciousness returned to reality, and the feeling of intent quickly faded. Everything was like the moon in the water. As for the bronze coin in his hand, the starry patterns on its surface had dimmed a little. Master? The child demigod was surprised. The slight change in Zhao Feng's aura just now naturally didn't escape his eyes. Seniors, we've reached our goal. Zhao Feng expressed his gratitude toward the couple. They had pretty much confirmed Lu Qinxin's whereabouts. The couple still had puzzled expressions. They still hadn't figured out what had happened to the Fan Luan Ancient Sound Palace. Brother Zhao, do you know how Lu Qinxin entered the Fan Luan Ancient Sound Palace? The couple looked over with questioning gazes. The Fan Luan Ancient Sound Palace comes from the ancient era before the Fan universe was born, and it involves the laws of heaven and earth, including the Tao of music, the Tao of life, and samsara. It's not something that any force can control. Zhao Feng said. In his mind, there were the memories of Lu Qinxin on the wall, as well as the enlightenment of the music Tao from the Starspot ancient copper coin. Firstly, the Fan Luan Ancient Sound Palace wasn't under the complete control of the Zither Palace. Even the founder couldn't do that. Secondly, it involved karma of the Tao of fate, as well as a mysterious force. There was also a of karma, and a of Tao, demigod of soul of divine, the of Tao of soul, the Tao of the of song, of Tao, which the Chun and many that of divine, Zhao Chun. If it wasn't for Qinxin, I wouldn't have entered the outside world so quickly, and I would have missed the demigod forgotten garden. If it wasn't for Qinxin, I wouldn't have entered the outside world so quickly, and I would have missed the demigod forgotten garden. Zhao Feng understood fate very well. Back then, becoming Lord Guanjuan's disciple was a turning point in his fate. Otherwise, Zhao Feng wouldn't have entered the world of cultivation so quickly, and it would have been delayed for decades. If Zhao Feng had listened to Patriarch Hong's suggestion and entered a 2-star sect through the Sacred Alliance, he would have only reached the peak small origin core realm. The skeletal division leader was the same. It only reached its current level because it followed Zhao Feng. One had to know that. The skeletal division leader's current strength was comparable to the Scarlet Moon Patriarch's, and with the addition of the Ghost Corpse Curse, it was even stronger than the Scarlet Moon Patriarch's. The group of people walked down from the 49th floor. There was still some doubt in the couple's eyes, but the Fan Luan Ancient Sound Palace wasn't something they could control. Senior Zhao, it doesn't seem like Lady Lu died a simple death, since she was able to reach the 49th floor. Li Shui couldn't help but be curious. There were many things that were weird about this. Firstly, if Lu Qinxin had stopped at the 48th floor, it would have been a good choice. Secondly, Zhao Feng didn't seem to be as sad as one would imagine. In fact, he was extremely calm. Qin succeeded in reversing fate and luck. She died contentedly. Everything she did seemed to be paving the way for a new life. Zhao Feng said in a low tone. After all, Lu Qinxin didn't die a violent death. That was her goal. The fact that Zhao Feng had found her made her have no regrets. She had even prepared a gift for Zhao Feng's possible arrival. I still need to ask the sage about Qinxin's new life, Zhao Feng thought. Now 7 years had passed. Zhao Feng suspected that Lu Qinxin had been reborn for 6 or 7 years. After leaving the ancient Sound Palace, Zhao Feng and the couple worked together to reseal the Fan Luan ancient Sound Palace. On the same day, under the urging of the Sky Sacred Qin Palace couple, Zhao Feng decided to temporarily stay in the Sky Sacred Qin Palace as a guest. The couple from the Sky Sacred Qin Palace didn't know that their unintentional action had helped the Sky Sacred Qin Palace avoid a disaster. Zhao Feng wanted to comprehend the star-spotted ancient bronze coin, so he agreed. Inside an elegant loft, Zhao Feng sat cross-legged and started to comprehend the star-spotted ancient bronze coin. His consciousness entered the vast and mysterious starry world. The sound of the zither lingered in his ears. It was dreamy and illusory, as if it had penetrated the reincarnation time and space. Zhao Feng instantly entered a transcendent state, and his soul intent rose once again. This time, in this peaceful environment, Zhao Feng used every second he had to comprehend. In order to increase the effect of his comprehension, Zhao Feng opened his god's spiritual eye and tried to imprint the intent into his mind. Zhao Feng didn't just rely on the star-spotted ancient bronze coin. He would only comprehend for 10 breaths each time, and then use a few hours to comprehend the power of heaven and earth to stabilize his intent. After all, there was a limit to the power of the Tao of music from the star-spotted ancient bronze coin. Zhao Feng wanted to absorb the most of its power. Furthermore, this star-spotted ancient bronze coin was Lu Qinxin's final gift, and Zhao Feng didn't want to use up all of its power, so he wanted to keep it. Time passed by. Surges of heaven and earth power would occasionally appear in the air above Zhao Feng's building, but they would quickly disappear. The intent contained within them seemed to have surpassed the level of a king. Within the dimension of his left eye, the size of the purple soul sea didn't change much, but it started to become translucent. This was something that only emperors who had reached the peak stages of the void god realm could have. Zhao Feng felt that his mental energy was like a seedling that was growing. The power of his intent spread through heaven and earth, and it became stronger and stronger. However, the starlight on the surface of the star-spotted ancient bronze coin started to dim. I'm just a step away from forming emperor intent. Excitement and expectation appeared in Zhao Feng's heart. After being refined by the god tribulation lightning and the ancient dream realm, his soul was comparable to an emperor's, and he had all the requirements to form emperor intent. As long as his intent increased by half a level, everything would happen. In the blink of an eye, a day or two passed. The power of heaven and earth above the building that Zhao Feng was in started to twist, and there was a layer of light on the surface. The scene was like auspicious clouds enveloping the surroundings, and it was extraordinary. No matter how hard Zhao Feng tried to hide it, he couldn't stop this interaction between heaven and earth. The increase in his intent was to become one with heaven and earth, and control the mysteries of heaven and earth. It's about time. Zhao Feng's mental energy intent was like a pearl that was being refined. It started to become crystal clear and gave off a rare light. At this moment in time, he had a hallucination that the power of wind, thunder, and fire in this world revolved around his will as if they were worshipping the emperor. If he was willing, with just one intent, Zhao Feng could restrict the space of an area, and not just affect the heaven-earth yuan qi. Normal emperors' understanding of heaven and earth had reached an unimaginable level. As a result, they were able to materialize their domain space and form a private elementary small world. However, a little world was built on the true yuan dimension, which was the source of power. At a certain moment in time, Zhao Feng's god's spiritual eye suddenly jumped a few times, as if it was giving a warning. Suddenly, a shocking intent of death crossed the limitless ocean and entered the Sky Qin zone, where the Sky Sacred Qin Palace was. An hour later, a strong, magnificent power of death quickly approached the sky-sacred Qin palace. It's the intent of an emperor, and it's the rare intent of death. The hearts of the couple from the sky-sacred Qin palace jumped. Everyone be on guard. The heavenly sacred Qin palace hurriedly activated the mountain-protecting formation. Is it here? The child demigod stood in front of the building and looked in a certain direction. The intent of an emperor was extremely strong. In terms of intent, it wasn't any weaker than a mystic light realm. After all, a mystic light realm's true yuan was the fusion of the soul and the true yuan. Even the child demigod felt uneasy in his mind. As the magnificent power of death neared, countless beings within several thousand miles felt the shadow of death, and their bodies went cold from fear. From the small ants to the human sovereigns and kings, they all felt uneasy and afraid. Emperor of Death, why have you come to the sky-sacred Qin palace? The couple from the sky-sacred Qin palace stood in the air as their magnificent powers covered the entrance. The two kings, one Qin and one sword, stood side by side, and their spatial domains actually supported each other. The couple from the sky-sacred Qin palace were originally a duo. Their cultivation complemented each other, and after a while, they became experts that teamed up against each other. The combination of their Qin and sword had once defeated peak-tier kings in a head-on battle. However, at this moment in time, facing the magnificent power of death that seemed to be able to devour everything, their faces went white, and they were like two candles in a storm. In their vision, the world fell into darkness. An ancient and imposing figure, wearing a dark golden crown, approached step by step like the projection of the Grim Reaper. Emperor of Death. The entire heavenly sacred Zither Palace was deathly silent. The couple from the sky-sacred Qin Palace knew this ancient Emperor of Death very well. The previous leader of the sky-sacred Qin Palace had once participated in hunting down the Emperor of Death, even if he was just a supporting force. Now that the Emperor of Death had arrived, the sky-sacred Qin Palace wouldn't be able to escape. Chapter 739. The Qin sword and Qin couple from the sky-sacred Qin Palace acted as if they were facing a great enemy. However, the coldness of death that was like a torrent caused their limbs to stiffen and their minds to be oppressed. Before the battle even started, the two felt as if their lives weren't in their control. Xiaofeng, you're indeed in the sky-sacred Qin Palace. The Emperor of Death's voice seemed to come from every direction, and the sky seemed to turn dark, as if it had fallen into a dark age. Rumble. A magnificent power of death covered heaven and earth, and clashed with the couple's Qin and sword harmony for the first time. Instantly, the sky above the Qin Palace started to shake. The protective formation of the two-star sect started to shake, and the light from the formation started to dim. Hold on. Not good. If the protective array collapses, the sky-sacred Qin Palace will probably turn into ruins. At this critical moment, almost 10,000 members of the sky-sacred Qin Palace participated in the defense of the array. Amongst them, there were dozens of sovereigns at the Origin Core realm and several hundred at the True Spirit realm. Thousands of elites of the sects stepped forward and inserted their power into the defensive formation. There was strength in numbers. The protective array of a two-star clan was extremely profound and could merge true force and true yuan into it. Wang, the protective array, managed to hold on. However, the hearts of the couple from the sky-sacred Qin Palace shook. The magnificent power of the Qin and sword had been shattered by the Emperor of Death. The two's figures shook, and they almost spat out a mouthful of blood. This was under the fact that the couple specialized in teamwork and could take the damage together. On top of that, the Emperor of Death didn't even look at them. Just the magnificent power radiating from his intent of death suppressed the couple. His divine sense covered the entire sky-sacred Qin Palace. As if he was searching for something, he soon found where Xiaofeng was. The Emperor of Death revealed a weird expression. This Xiaofeng seemed to be forming the intent of a peak void god realm. His heart shook. How could he be so fast? Any void god realm emperor was born with great fortune and great fortune. They had to work hard and go through ups and downs in their lives. Even though Zhao Feng was only forming the intent of an emperor, and not trying to break through to the peak void god realm. However, once the great emperor will was formed, there would be no bottleneck for the great perfection nihility god realm. Hehe Zhao Feng, even if your monarch will is successfully nurtured, you won't be a match for me. Besides, I won't let you have your way. The Emperor of Death's laughter was like the merciless wind of death. As soon as he finished speaking, the Emperor-level death will rumbled through the soul-hollow sky, charging directly towards the elegant pavilion Zhao Feng was in. The Emperor intent contained the powerful intent of death. When it attacked, it could almost obliterate the soul of a normal king. At the very least, it would shatter the soul of a normal king. Dream on. The combined king's intent of the Zither Palace couple brought with it a gentle and vast power that blocked the roof of the elegant building. The combined intents of two domain-level kings slightly surpassed peak-tier kings. Moreover, the fused will was even more adept at defense. Interesting. The child demigod took a step forward, and a surge of demigod intent shot into the sky and landed on the Emperor of Death's intent. Boom! The intent of the three kings clashed with the intent of death, creating a tsunami in the soul dimension. Although this intent was just the power of mental energy, it contained the intent that its owner had comprehended, and it could shatter the physical world. Wah! The child demigod's body shook, and blood leaked out of his mouth. He was in an offensive form, so the damage he received was relatively greater. The faces of the couple went red and pale white. Their minds were injured, and this was even after they had taken on the damage together. Furthermore, the majority of the pressure was taken on by the child demigod. Such a transcendent will. Which divine lord have you reincarnated? The Emperor of Death's expression changed slightly as he stared at the child demigod. The child demigod used a profound method to dissolve the intent of death in the clash of intents just now. What was even more unbelievable was that the child demigod had used his sacred body to take on a portion of the damage. We have to stall for time and stop the Emperor of Death. If Zhao Feng successfully nurtures Emperor intent, the Sky Sacred Qin Palace will have some hope. The couple looked at each other and took a deep breath. Now that things had reached this point, they didn't have the time to blame Zhao Feng for bringing danger to the Sky Sacred Qin Palace. Of course, the strength of the child demigod had also exceeded their imaginations. His power made the Emperor of Death suspicious. If this child demigod really was a sacred lord, he might have a way to deal with the Emperor of Death. Sacred lord? Humph. You weren't even born when I was dominating heaven and earth. The child demigod snickered coldly as he wiped the blood from his mouth. He was also wary of the Emperor of Death's strength. If they didn't team up, even he wouldn't be able to escape. Seeing the Emperor of Death's true body, the child demigod had to admit that even if he became an emperor, he would most likely lose if he fought the Emperor of Death alone. Emperor of Death, you can't stop me from nurturing Emperor intent. A calm and confident voice sounded from within the elegant hall, and a powerful intent that was approaching perfection appeared in the air. Zhao Feng, the couple from the Sky Sacred Qin Palace, revealed joyful expressions. Zhao Feng's voice had the effect of calming one's heart. Stop boasting. I haven't even started yet. The Emperor of Death laughed coldly. Although he said that, the Emperor of Death still felt pressured. If Zhao Feng successfully formed Emperor intent, the difficulty of killing him would increase. Even the Emperor of Death wasn't scared of that. Go! Zhao Feng roared as a surge of intent shot toward the Emperor of Death. It was as if God Tribulation lightning was wreaking havoc in the soul dimension. This aura. The Emperor of Death felt an uneasy aura. Zhao Feng's intent was extremely close to an emperor's, and it had merged the laws of God Tribulation lightning into it. Humph. The Emperor of Death snickered coldly as his intent of death turned into a black dragon of death that charged toward Zhao Feng. Boom! Boom! The child demigod and the couple's attacks were instantly pushed back. Such a terrifying technique of death has been merged into his Emperor intent. The Emperor of Death's mastery of the Tao of the soul is unimaginable. The child demigod's heart hurt. Only Zhao Feng's intent, which had merged the laws of God Tribulation lightning into it, was barely able to clash head-on with the Emperor of Death. Whoosh! The two intents clashed for a breath or two, and black smoke rose. Whoosh! Zhao Feng's intent was defeated, and he harumphed. Scythe of Death. The magnificent power of death rippled around the Emperor of Death, and a giant scythe surrounded by black mist appeared in his hand, giving off a baleful aura that seemed to be able to slash through the heavens. This time, he didn't use his Emperor intent anymore. Instead, he used a technique of death. It wasn't that the Emperor of Death didn't have a chance of winning, but he realized that the clash just now seemed to have increased Zhao Feng's intent. He saw through it. Zhao Feng's expression changed. Back in the demigod Forgotten Garden, he had used the Mermaid King to speed up the formation of his king intent. Crack! The protective array of the Sky's Sacred Qin Palace started to shake, and the terrifying power of the Scythe of Death danced through the air. Not good. The couple from the Sky's Sacred Qin Palace were forced to retreat, and their spatial domains were being eroded by the aura of the Scythe of Death. Heaven sealing 18 palms. The child demigod took action in time, and sent out golden palms that locked down the Emperor of Death. However, even then the couple from the Sky's Sacred Qin Palace were injured. On top of that, the Emperor of Death was attacking Zhao Feng, who was still in the array. He wanted to stop Zhao Feng. Zhao Feng, who had the ninth god's eye, was his biggest target. However, the child demigod's heaven-sealing palms restricted the Emperor of Death's offense and slightly suppressed him in terms of intent. Arg! Some experts within the protective array were turned into a puddle of black blood by the power of death that leaked in. The Emperor of Death quickly waved the Scythe of Death and unleashed an attack that covered several hundred miles. The couple from the Sky's Sacred Qin Palace, the child demigod, Zhao Feng, and the entire Sky's Sacred Qin Palace were attacked. It could be said that he had easily suppressed an entire two-star sect by himself, and he even had experts like Zhao Feng and the child demigod on top of that. From the looks of it, the couple from the Sky's Sacred Qin Palace and the child demigod wouldn't be able to last more than a few breaths. An aura of death covered everything within several thousand miles, as if it was hell on earth. Disciples of the Sky's Sacred Qin Palace were dying every second. I can't let the Sky's Sacred Qin Palace bear this calamity. Zhao Feng slowly stood up. Suddenly, his purple hair blew in the wind as his left eye locked onto the Emperor of Death, like a ball of purple illusion god lightning. Void space eye slash. A weird ripple of eye bloodline power covered the place where the Emperor of Death was standing. Zhao Feng's god's spiritual eye locked onto the Emperor of Death. Heaven sealing 18 palms. The child demigod cooperated very well, and restricted the Emperor of Death. Child's play. The Emperor of Death stood on the spot and didn't move, allowing the scarlet blade to slice through his body. Shoo! The Emperor of Death stood motionlessly on the spot. He was like a statue of death that stood proudly throughout the ages. That's the immortal death body. His body is like a living corpse. In theory, he doesn't have any weak points, not even his organs. The child demigod took in a cold breath. The immortal death body was an undying body. Although it didn't focus on physical strength, its survivability was extremely strong. Simply put, the Emperor of Death was a powerful zombie with an undying body. The void space eye slash is countered. Zhao Feng wasn't surprised. He had heard a lot about the Emperor of Death from Duan Wuqing. Normal enemies with an undying body could be targeted at the soul if their physical body was too strong. However, the problem was that the Emperor of Death's mastery of the soul was one of the top existences in the Tsang Ocean, and his eyes of death were present. No wonder the Emperor of Death was able to stand at the peak of emperors. Ha ha ha. I'll kill you guys first. The Emperor of Death's laughter was chilling as it echoed through the sky. After successfully interrupting Zhao Feng's emperor intent, his attention turned to the couple and the child demigod. He would first kill these flies, and then deal with Zhao Feng in order to execute his eye-stealing plan. The scythe of death in his hand turned and slashed toward the couple. Crack! The giant scythe shrouded in the power of death slashed through the Zither Palace couple's defenses like it was cutting through rotten wood. The couple screamed. At least one of them would die under the shadow of the scythe of death. Chapter 740. Not good. The Zither Palace couple cried out involuntarily. The death scythe slashed through their spatial domains and defensive layers. The two were pushed back 100 yards and spat out mouthfuls of blood as their faces went pale white. This was only the child demigod using the sky ceiling 18 palms to weaken the Emperor of Death's attack by 30% and greatly limit his speed. If it wasn't for that, the couple would have been killed by the scythe of death already. Shwa. A deathly cold sickle shadow slashed in front of the two people whose defenses had been broken. The couple were filled with despair. At least one of them was going to die. Dailian, see you in the next life. The scholarly middle-aged man from the Zither Palace couple let out a roar and barely managed to move his body, using his body to block the scythe of death. If he blocked this attack with his king body, he would be able to save the palace master's life. After doing this, the scholarly middle-aged man closed his eyes. Brother Xing. The palace master screamed, but there was nothing she could do. At this moment in time, Zhao Feng and the child demigod were quite a distance away, so it would be very difficult for them to make it in time. Death was already decided. A mocking smile appeared on the Emperor of Death's face. However, the next instant the situation changed. Spatial movement. A wisp of eye-bloodline power appeared in front of the scholarly middle-aged man. Shwa. The part of the scythe of death that hit the scholarly middle-aged man suddenly disappeared. The situation? It was as if someone had taken a bite out of the middle of a crescent moon. The two ends of the scythe of death split into two and brushed past the scholarly middle-aged man's head and feet. He's not dead. The scholarly middle-aged man paused as cold sweat covered his body. He had just escaped from the gates of hell. Spatial movement, this kind of spatial movement. The Emperor of Death paused. As if he had sensed something, his expression changed dramatically. Shwa. The part of the scythe of death that had disappeared happened to pass through the Emperor of Death's head, causing blood to appear. Ridiculous. The Emperor of Death murmured. Although the chilling edge of death wasn't able to do much damage to his immortal death body. However, being slapped in the face by his own death secret technique was a humiliation that had never happened in the past thousands of years. Death Frost. The Emperor of Death's expression darkened. At the same time, he took the blow head-on, and with the point of his finger, a black beam of frost shot out. Wherever it passed, the void froze. Be careful. The Zither Palace couple had just escaped danger when they felt a deadly chill. Poof. The scholarly middle-aged man was the first to bear the brunt of the attack. His defensive layer had just formed when it was pierced through by the black deathly frost, and his body stiffened. All of a sudden, a layer of cold black frost spread across the scholarly middle-aged man's body. The cold, fiendish aura of death permeated his entire body. Hiss! Not only was the scholarly middle-aged man frozen and unable to move, but his body and soul were also corroded by the cold power of death. His life essence was rapidly flowing away. Brother Xing, the palace master of the Zither Palace, barely managed to dispel a few traces of the frost. A white flame appeared on her palm and attached to the scholarly man's back, dispelling the frost. On the other hand, a playful smile appeared on the Emperor of Death's face. Zhao Feng's god's spiritual eye scanned over the scholarly middle-aged man, and his expression changed dramatically. Stop! Arg! The scholarly middle-aged man screamed as the power of death, contained within the frost, started to boil and cover his body. That situation was like a bottle of frozen venom that had just entered the body. Perhaps it was just cold. However, if one melted it, the venom would be completely released. The Emperor of Death's frost of death contained the deadly power of death, which was the lethal poison formed from ice. In the blink of an eye, the scholarly middle-aged man's body started to melt, and he turned into a puddle of black blood. Brother Xing, it's all my fault. The palace master's heart was dripping blood from the pain. The child demigod and Zhao Feng's hearts dropped. The death frost could freeze the target, and if the target was melted by flames, the power of death within would be released. However, if it wasn't dissolved, the power of death within the death frost would continue to corrode the target's life force. In reality, the scholarly middle-aged man was fated to die no matter if the palace master tried to save him or not. It was only a matter of time before he died. Don't be sad. I'll send you to see him. The Emperor of Death smiled as a second beam of cold light shot toward the palace master of the Qin Palace. Master! Li Shuai exclaimed from within the protective array. If there was no exception, the palace master would die for sure. She wouldn't be able to block the Emperor of Death's technique by herself, even after being weakened by the child demigod. At this moment of life and death, lightning wings flying technique. A bolt of lightning surrounded by scarlet lightning appeared in front of the palace master. You! The palace master of the Qin Palace revealed a look of shock and bewilderment. She only felt that a purple-haired young man had used his body to block the frost of death attack for her. It was as if her husband had used his life to save hers. The youth was obviously Zhao Feng. See, a surge of extreme coldness, and the aura of the 10,000 ancient races appeared around Zhao Feng. The coldness and aura made the palace master's body feel pressured. Wang! A layer of beautiful ice-blue scales appeared on Zhao Feng's skin, and the coldness of the death frost was instantly melted when it got close. Peng! The remaining pure power of death landed on Zhao Feng's body and started to freeze, reducing its power by 40 to 50%. It obviously couldn't threaten him, who had the mystic ice-scaled race's bloodline. 10,000 ancient races bloodline. The Emperor of Death murmured as his eyes twinkled. Even if the 10,000 ancient races bloodline was ranked in the hundreds or thousands, it was still a legendary bloodline in the fan universe. Furthermore, Zhao Feng's bloodline came from the mystic ice-scaled race, which was ranked 89th. A bloodline that specialized in defensive ice power was the perfect counter to the Emperor of Death's Frost of Death, and other Yin-type secret arts of death would be greatly weakened. Palace Master, you stay here and protect the Sky Sacred Palace. I will lure the Emperor of Death away. Zhao Feng's voice sounded in the Palace Master's mind. He felt slightly guilty. He was the one who lured the Emperor of Death here. It could be said that he was the one who brought disaster to the Sky Sacred Palace and killed the Palace Master's husband. As soon as he finished speaking, a surge of magnificent power that was comparable to an emperor enveloped the Palace Master and sent her into the protective array. You be careful. The Palace Master knew that she would only drag Zhao Feng down. Looks like it'll be very hard to stop Zhao Feng from forming emperor intent. The Emperor of Death murmured, but he didn't attack immediately. His focus was on Zhao Feng. The Palace Master was just a slightly bigger ant in the Emperor of Death's eyes. Scarlet Destruction Eye Flame. The instant Zhao Feng's body froze, a scarlet gold light appeared in his left eye. Whoosh! A half-transparent scarlet-colored lightning fire landed on the Emperor of Death's body and roared through the physical and mental energy dimensions. Even the Emperor of Death's heart jumped as he felt an uneasy aura. Looking closely, the Scarlet Destruction Eye Flame had a faint golden luster on its surface. It could even be called a higher-level Scarlet Gold Eye Flame. This eye flame contained the essence of the Scarlet Destruction True Flame, and it was comparable to the Golden Wind Lightning. The power of the God Tribulation Lightning contained in Zhao Feng's soul was dozens of times stronger than when he was at the Pirate Sacred Land. With Zhao Feng's Emperor-level soul, the power of this eye bloodline flame, that was close to the Scarlet Gold grade, was enough to make normal emperors change their expressions. Boom! The Emperor of Death's figure shook slightly as he felt as if his body was being bombarded by 10,000 lightning-colored flames. The intent of destruction and God Tribulation Lightning even injured his immortal death body. Even his eyes of death were slightly affected by the attack. If it was a normal emperor, they would probably be at a disadvantage. Apart from the aura of destruction, the Scarlet Destruction Wind Lightning also contains the power of God Tribulation Lightning. Could it be? The Emperor of Death's heart shook. The Scarlet Destruction Eye Flame was indeed worthy of being Zhao Feng's strongest eye bloodline technique. After merging the power of God Tribulation Lightning into it, it was like adding wings to a tiger. Attack together! The scarlet-colored wings behind Zhao Feng's back summoned a storm of scarlet lightning as he charged toward the Emperor of Death. As soon as he said that, the child demigod below was like a golden cannonball, and his physical body seemed to materialize as it formed a golden fist that contained a dominating intent. Scarlet Destruction Exploding Fist. Zhao Feng and the child demigod's attacks arrived at the same time. Zhao Feng was the main attacker. The Scarlet Destruction Exploding Fist unleashed the fire destruction attribute of the Scarlet Destruction Wind Lightning to its extreme. On top of that, this simple punch of his was infused with the 3 domains. The power of the Illusion Maze domain, Mystic Ice domain, and Wind Lightning domain all gathered into one punch. On the other hand, the child demigod used his sacred body and fist techniques to suppress the Emperor of Death's physical body and intent. In reality, his existence restricted the Emperor of Death's strength, making it hard for the latter to face Zhao Feng's attacks head-on. 3 spatial domains? What? Golden Kuan sacred body? What's the relationship between the child demigod and Kuan Yin? The Emperor of Death was stunned. The combined attacks of Zhao Feng and the child demigod landed on the Emperor of Death. The Emperor of Death's body became heavy, but he didn't panic. Even though the combined attacks of Zhao Feng and the child demigod were enough to threaten many emperors, the Emperor of Death didn't panic. Death Force Field. The air around the Emperor of Death turned into a terrifying pitch-black force field. The power of death spun like ink within the pitch-black force field, and all life force within its range was sucked away, including the Heaven-Earth Yuan Qi. Boom! The death force field absorbed as much of Zhao Feng's and Lu Yu's peerless attacks, and with a twist, it created a terrifying backlash. Retreat! Both of them felt a sense of danger. The death force field could absorb attacks from the outside world and counterattack to a certain degree. Zhao Feng's expression changed dramatically, and his heart started to jump. He circulated his mental energy to the maximum, and his Scarlet Destruction lightning wings fluttered rapidly. Shua! An intent that could shake heaven and earth pushed Zhao Feng and the child demigod back even faster, dodging most of the power of the death force field. Pung! 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 Zhao Feng's heart rate sped up. That instant just now was too dangerous. He suddenly felt that something was wrong. His spirit and willpower were crystal clear, perfect and transcendent. Between his thoughts, the many profound truths of heaven and earth and the space around him revolved around him. Boom! A brand new emperor intent soared into the sky. With Zhao Feng at the center, lightning boomed, and clouds flashed in the air. It was a grand and beautiful sight. Emperor intent. Chapter 741. Emperor Intent. Zhao Feng stood where he was, and his purple hair started to move in a weird rhythm. Wind blew above his head, and arcs of lightning flashed in every direction. A layer of crystal appeared in his purple soul sea, and his mental energy intent was like a crystal that had been polished to perfection. His mental energy aura seemed to merge with heaven and earth, and the various intents of heaven and earth appeared several times clearer than before. This was the perfection of the soul intent, at the peak of the void god realm. If the soul of a normal king was like a pebble, then the soul of an emperor was like a crystal agate. The difference between the quantity of the soul wasn't like the difference between heaven and earth, but in terms of quality, it was huge. At this moment in time, the new emperor's magnificent power and the vast aura affected everything within 10,000 miles. Most of the clouds of death above the sky's sacred Qin palace dissipated. Emperor intent. Within the protective array, the palace master, Li Shuai, and company looked at Zhao Feng with joy and respect. If Zhao Feng could comprehend the intent of a peak void god realm expert, then he wouldn't have any bottlenecks when he became an emperor. As long as he had enough time, 10 years at most, 3 to 5 years at the very least, Zhao Feng would become the new emperor of the Tsang Ocean. One had to know that the entire Tsang Ocean hadn't given birth to a new emperor in the past few hundred years. The birth of any emperor would affect the situation of an area. As expected, I can't stop it. The Emperor of Death's calm expression became solemn for the first time. This was because the magnificent power that Zhao Feng displayed was already close to that of an emperor. It could be said that before Zhao Feng even appeared, 95% of the emperor intent had been formed. If they fought, Zhao Feng could form emperor intent at any moment. The pursuit of death. It's still unknown who will win. Zhao Feng's eyes were crystal clear and filled with confidence and battle intent. As soon as he finished speaking, he made a grabbing motion with one hand, and a burning cloud of crimson destruction emanated layers of golden ripples that enveloped a part of the sky. Whoosh! A flaming claw of wind and lightning appeared within the crimson mist and slammed toward the Emperor of Death with a force that could cover the sky. The Emperor of Death snickered coldly as the pitch-black death force field around him twisted and formed a ripple of death that turned everything in its path into dust. Rumble! A few mountains nearby instantly turned into ashes that filled the sky, as if they had melted into thin air. Pung pung! The scarlet-red claw of wind lightning was quickly worn down by the ripples of death. When it got close to the Emperor of Death, it only had 40% of its power left. Immediately after, as the Emperor of Death circulated his intent, a pitch-black dimension of death stacked on top of the heavens and earth. Kacha! Zhao Feng's martial monarch force was instantly devoured. That's the realm of death, a simple small world, the child demigod exclaimed. Zhao Feng also felt an unparalleled power of a small world. It was countless times stronger than an ordinary space domain. Scarlet Destruction Exploding Fist. Zhao Feng punched out, and his 3 spatial domains clashed head-on with the Emperor of Death's little world. The intent of an emperor made Zhao Feng's Scarlet Destruction Wind Lightning's power rise by several levels. The improvement of his soul made the 3 spatial domains become more corporeal. The power of the 3 domains, which represented the Tao of the soul, bloodline and cultivation technique, was concentrated in the Scarlet Destruction Wind Lightning Fist, which was shining with a golden luster. Along with the Illusion City Bewildering Shadow and the Profound Ice Storm, they all exploded at one point. Bam! The child demigod was like a golden Buddha as he used the heaven-sealing 18 palms. His sacred body crushed mountains and rivers as he restricted the Emperor of Death. The combination of the two had reached a whole new level, and it was enough to force back normal emperors. Boom! Boom! The Emperor of Death pointed out with his finger, and the power of his little world of death turned into a dark dimension that devoured all power. Zhao Feng and the child demigod's attacks were like stones sinking into the ocean when they got close. With a weird sizzling sound, the Emperor of Death pushed the power of his little world of death toward Zhao Feng and the child demigod, causing the dimension to tremble. Zhao Feng and the child demigod were suppressed by the power of the little world, and a coldness spread through their bodies. Not good. The two shivered. They felt like the small world of death was like a huge abyss, emitting a terrifying suction force. In the void, an endless amount of life essence was being pulled and devoured. Zhao Feng and the child demigod both felt as if their life force was being sucked away. Arg! Inside the protective array of the sky's sacred Qin Palace, many members of the Qin Palace instantly turned into skeletons. Lightning Wings Flying Technique. A pair of large wings of wind and lightning extended from Zhao Feng's back. One could clearly see the bones and feathers on them, as if they were the wings of an ancient lightning bird. Chua! Zhao Feng took the child demigod and flew several hundred yards away in the blink of an eye. If it weren't for the fact that he had formed emperor intent, Zhao Feng wouldn't have been able to fly so far. Where do you think you're going? The Emperor of Death's figure was like the shadow of the god of death, as he closed in on Zhao Feng and the child demigod. Whoosh! 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 In the blink of an eye, the 3 of them had flown into the outer realm and left the inner realm. The sky's sacred Qin palaces, people only saw 2 motes of light quickly merging into the universe in the sky and disappearing in the blink of an eye. Only the palace master of the Zither Palace could see the battle between the 3 with her divine sense. One of the scarlet-red lights was Zhao Feng and the child demigod. The Emperor of Death's speed is so fast. Zhao Feng realized that the Emperor of Death was easily catching up to him. One had to know that Zhao Feng's current speed was even slightly faster than some Void God Realm emperors. The increase in his intent allowed Zhao Feng to comprehend the core of the wings of wind and lightning. Master, we can't beat the Emperor of Death right now, the child demigod said solemnly. Zhao Feng's eyes twinkled, but he didn't deny it. The Emperor of Death easily suppressed the entire Sky Sacred Qin Palace in the first exchange. The Emperor of Death had reached the peak of emperors in every aspect. At the very least, Zhao Feng still couldn't find a way to threaten the Emperor of Death's immortal death body. Just from this alone, the Emperor of Death was undefeatable. Furthermore, Zhao Feng and the child demigod wouldn't be able to break through the Emperor of Death's little world in a short amount of time. The Emperor of Death's foundation is so strong. I'll definitely lose if we fight for a long time. Zhao Feng made his decision. Thinking up to there, the wings on his back started to flap even faster. Shua. Under Zhao Feng's command, the child demigod entered the ancient metal ring. The next instant a shocking scene appeared. Lightning wings spatial flash. The wings of wind lightning behind Zhao Feng's back released a blinding light, and his speed reached the maximum as he turned into a streak of lightning that merged into the air. Shua. The Emperor of Death only saw a streak of lightning that disappeared. Zhao Feng was nowhere to be seen within a few thousand miles. Lightning wings spatial flash? That's the highest level of the wind lightning inheritance. The Emperor of Death was slightly dazed. The lightning wings secret technique that Zhao Feng used was the most ideal level of the wings of wind and lightning wings spatial flash. This secret skill was based on the thunder wings wind flash, and then merged with the thunder wings flying technique, allowing the user to fly through the air at extreme speed. In the blink of an eye, Zhao Feng appeared a few thousand miles away. His speed was enough to leave many emperors in the dust. The name of the wind lightning inheritance, as the fastest emperor, wasn't just for show. Back then, the wind lightning emperor had even managed to escape from a sacred lord. One spatial flash can travel several thousand miles. This is the limitless ocean, so there's more than 10 times the normal speed. This isn't enough. Zhao Feng wasn't very satisfied. If this spatial flash was in the zone, it would only be able to travel several hundred miles. At his peak, the wind lightning emperor could easily spatial flash more than 1,000 miles in the zone. As expected, this speed wasn't enough to shake off the Emperor of Death. Death instant shadow. The Emperor of Death followed like a shadow. One could only see a dark streak of light in the limitless ocean. It was also a powerful spatial technique. In the blink of an eye, the Emperor of Death was quickly approaching. Lightning wings spatial flash. The wings of lightning behind Zhao Feng's back once again released a bright light, and he turned into a small arc of lightning that merged into the air and flew away. In the next instant, Zhao Feng traveled another few thousand miles. This time, he was more than 1,000 miles further than before. After becoming an emperor, Zhao Feng's understanding of space had increased, and he could now use the lightning wings spatial flash as he pleased. The extreme speed of the intent of wind lightning, combined with the speed of flying, gave him the glory of being the fastest emperor. Half the time it took to make tea later, Zhao Feng's lightning wings spatial flash became more proficient, and it used less energy while increasing his speed. At the end, every time Zhao Feng used the spatial flash, he could travel 7,000 to 8,000 miles. Of course, there was still a gap between this and the wind lightning emperor at his peak. However, even then, Zhao Feng's lightning wings spatial flash had reached the peak speed of anyone below the Sacred Lord realm. An hour later, the distance between Zhao Feng and the Emperor of Death was increasing. Lightning wings spatial flash. The fastest speed Emperor has ever reached. The Emperor of Death's eyebrows furrowed as he felt helpless. He had heard of the wind lightning emperor before. He had once used his speed to escape from a sacred lord. At the end, the Emperor of Death's divine sense completely lost track of Zhao Feng. He could only use the wisp of aura left in the air to chase after Zhao Feng. Luckily, Zhao Feng wasn't able to create a fake aura from the lightning wings spatial flash. The thunder wings space flash was accompanied by the condensed power of wind and thunder. It had a profound concept and a vast momentum. Moreover, it was accompanied by spatial fluctuations. This was something that Zhao Feng felt helpless about. He had to create enough distance before using the basic version of the lightning wings wind flash. Only then would he be able to use a fake aura to lure the Emperor of Death away. However, the problem was, Zhao Feng's speed didn't have an overwhelming advantage. He was only slightly faster than the Emperor of Death. The Emperor of Death had an ocean of true yuan, and could use a large amount of energy to chase after Zhao Feng with the death instant shadow. Within the limitless ocean, the two extreme speeds and auras caused some of the scattered experts from the outer realms to feel a suffocating sense of fear. 5 or 6 days later, Zhao Feng finally escaped from the Emperor of Death and entered a new island zone. Whoosh! A streak of lightning descended like a resplendent meteor into an island region similar to the Azure Flower continent. Zhao Feng let out a long breath. His face was pale white, and his body started to shake. He sat down and took out a fruit from the ancient dream realm and ate it. Chapter 742. The continent that Zhao Feng entered was called the Bright Flower Continent, and it was on the same level as the Azure Flower Continent where he was born. Boom! A 1,000-yard-wide crater appeared where he landed due to the shockwave from the wings of wind and lightning. Zhao Feng's face was pale white, and his aura was weak. He first ate a fruit from the ancient dream realm. Since his true yuan and yuan qi were all used up, the effects of a fruit from the ancient dream realm would be even better. However, the ancient dream realm fruit took a long time to digest. While Zhao Feng was fleeing, he used the spiritual pills and resources he had on hand to replenish his energy. The heaven-earth yuan qi contained within the ancient dream realm fruit was closer to the origin. Apart from increasing one's cultivation, it also strengthened one's body and organs. It was countless times better than the aura from the ancient dream realm. Zhao Feng's soul and intent had both reached the level of an emperor, so he could absorb the ancient dream realm fruit more efficiently. He didn't need to worry about his foundation becoming unstable. At this moment in time, he inhaled and exhaled, and a vast river of heaven-earth yuan qi entered his true yuan dimension. The higher one's intent was, the faster one could recover. The recovery speed of the 10,000 ancient races' bloodlines was several times faster than normal bloodlines. In less than a day, Zhao Feng's yuan qi and energy had mostly recovered. Furthermore, after eating the ancient dream realm fruit, Zhao Feng's cultivation had increased. Zhao Feng continued to circulate the 10,000 divine thoughts technique and multitask. Within the Purple Soul Sea, there were more than 100 ancient and peculiar lightning patterns. Their auras were deep, and they shone with a dim light. These symbols of lightning were connected to each other like a circuit. As his understanding of the God Tribulation intent deepened, and he formed Emperor intent, Zhao Feng was able to use the power of the God Tribulation lightning. However, the recovery speed of the God Tribulation lightning was very slow. Zhao Feng was still saving it when fighting the Emperor of Death. When I have a few hundred wisps of God Tribulation lightning, I'll be able to threaten the Emperor of Death. If I can absorb 1,000 wisps, I'll be invincible against anyone below the Sacred Lord realm. Zhao Feng's eyes twinkled. At the moment, only the Scarlet Destruction Eye Flame, which had merged with the power of the God Tribulation lightning, could deal some light damage to the Emperor of Death's immortal death body. Deity Tribulation lightning, Wings of Tempest, Crimson Tempest. In Zhao Feng's mind there were 3 directions. All of these could increase his overall strength. Even the speed of the Tempest wings was an important factor in one's strength. Zhao Feng also had 2 thoughts. They were cultivating the Thunder Wings Spatial Flash and the Crimson Gold Tempest, which was of a higher level. As he nurtured the Emperor's will, Zhao Feng's cultivation speed increased greatly under the influence of his transcendent intent. Some of the bottlenecks in the past were easily broken. While Zhao Feng was concentrating on his cultivation, he didn't know that his arrival had brought a great impact to the inner region of the Clearflower region. So. In the distance, there was the sound of rushing wind. Several figures were approaching the huge pit where Zhao Feng was. It's over there. A day ago something happened in the sky. Rumor has it that it was a dazzling meteor that had never been seen before. It dragged along a beautiful gust of wind and lightning as it entered the Bright Flower Continent. The power of the meteor when it landed could probably kill a venerable. In the void, some figures were communicating with each other. So, on that day, Zhao Feng fell from the limitless ocean into the Bright Flower Zone like a meteor surrounded by lightning. In the eyes of the overlords of the sects, It was a phenomenon from the sky. Maybe it was a rare meteorite or a heavenly treasure. However, the 1,000-yard-wide pit that Zhao Feng was in had a powerful aura that made it impossible for the nearby beings to get close. At this moment, the sound of flying came from 2 or 3 directions. The weakest of the experts were at the true lord rank, while the strongest were at the late-stage small origin core realm. The situation of the Clearflower region was similar to the Azure Flower continent. There were no Void God realm kings, and the strongest force here was only 1.5 star. Therefore, those who rushed over after hearing the news were all top powerhouses in the region. Some were even the strongest. What a powerful aura! Some of the peak experts felt an irresistible magnificent power when they got within a few hundred miles of the pit. Clouds of origin chi appeared in the sky, surrounded by wind and lightning. This aura, could it be some kind of treasure? There were more than 10 to 20 experts from the region who had rushed over. However, after reaching a radius of 100 or 2 miles, they found it difficult to move forward. None of them had ever seen a Void God realm king before. In reality, this was a phenomenon caused by Zhao Feng's cultivation, but his mental energy aura was extremely restrained. Therefore, most of these experts didn't think about it. After all, the might and aura of the heavens, and the earth it revealed, had already exceeded their horizons in knowledge. Even spiritual sense has been suppressed. An origin core realm sovereign barely managed to get within 100 miles and felt like he was suffocating. Zhao Feng, who was cultivating, sensed the approaching figures. He didn't bother. If Zhao Feng wanted to increase his cultivation speed, he needed to use his emperor intent to absorb the heaven-earth yuan qi. The phenomenon couldn't be stopped even in a different place. Anyway, these people wouldn't be able to get close to the pit he was in. Just the aura alone was something that those below the sovereign lord rank couldn't get close. As expected, most of these experts couldn't get within 100 miles, and their spiritual sense couldn't sense Zhao Feng's existence. 3 days later, the effect of cultivating emperor intent is indeed different. Zhao Feng ate another ancient dream realm fruit. Within the forest of the ancient dream realm, there were more than 20 spiritual fruits on top of a towering tree, and they were guarded by Zhao Feng's 2 slave beasts, the green-spotted python and the ancient Yao bird. Zhao Feng would pick the ripe ancient dream realm spiritual fruits first. Unknowingly, Zhao Feng's cultivation was slowly approaching the middle stages of the Void God realm. He estimated that if he cultivated for 2 months, he would be able to reach the middle stages of the Void God realm after eating 10 ancient dream realm fruits at most. This was due to the emperor intent, which greatly increased his cultivation speed. Master, if I can eat 4 or 5 of these spiritual fruits, my golden koan sacred body will have a chance of reaching the early stages, and my strength will recover faster. If I eat some other treasures, I won't be far from reaching the middle stages of the Void God realm. The child demigod's voice sounded. He found that Zhao Feng had these spiritual fruits that were similar to the ancient dream realm, and they were dozens of times stronger. The child demigod was very smart, and he made this request when Zhao Feng was in danger. If it was under normal circumstances, Zhao Feng definitely wouldn't agree. Zhao Feng thought for a while, and gave the child demigod 5 ancient dream realm fruits. The child demigod was too useful in fighting against the Emperor of Death. His sacred body and secret techniques like the sky sealing 18 palms could suppress the Emperor of Death's intent to a certain extent, limiting his strength. This meant that the Emperor of Death that Zhao Feng had faced before wasn't at his peak. Otherwise, even if Zhao Feng didn't die, he would be heavily injured and wouldn't be able to retreat easily. Zhao Feng knew that the child demigod had no loyalty. His biggest wish was to obtain resources and recover his demigod strength. Little Kuan Yin, in the next battle, if you hold back, I will greatly restrict your resources. Zhao Feng added. The child demigod's heart shook. Could it be that Zhao Feng could tell that he hadn't used 100% of his battle power? In reality, after recovering to the Void God realm, the child demigod had many secret techniques that he could use. In the 1,000-zhang-wide pit, Zhao Feng and the child demigod were both cultivating. The difference was that Zhao Feng used the 10,000 divine thoughts technique to split his thoughts into several parts and focus on different aspects. Currently, Zhao Feng's will could be split into over 1,500 streams, which was comparable to martial monarch Duanmu. Although that was the case, but in true cultivation, being able to split it into 4 or 5 strands was already an impressive feat. Splitting one's will into 100 or 1,000 was only limited to some simple tasks, such as controlling spiritual pets and splitting mental energy attacks. For example, comprehending the scarlet gold wind lightning and absorbing the power of the god tribulation lightning all required a lot of mental energy. On this day, Zhao Feng's purple soul sea had absorbed a total of 170 wisps of god tribulation lightning. It seemed that the further he went, the faster he absorbed it. This wasn't just because of Emperor Zhao Feng's intent. His soul had absorbed a certain amount of god tribulation lightning, and it had a wisp of the aura of the god tribulation. The god tribulation lightning within the god tribulation head didn't reject Zhao Feng's soul as much as before. Shoo! 170 ancient symbols of lightning appeared in his purple soul sea, and they gave off an immortal and undying aura. Zhao Feng's soul and intent were being refined and strengthened again and again. His soul and intent now had some characteristics of the god tribulation lightning. For example, his mental energy attacks had the element of the god tribulation, which countered almost all powers in heaven and earth. The damage it caused couldn't be erased. Over the past few days, Zhao Feng's comprehension of the scarlet gold wind lightning had reached a breakthrough on the basis of Emperor intent. The scarlet destruction True Yuan in his True Yuan dimension started to shine with a golden light. The scarlet gold wind lightning has been comprehended to 40 to 50%, and its power is comparable to the wind lightning Emperor's golden wind lightning. Zhao Feng murmured, if the god tribulation intent was added on, the scarlet gold wind lightning's power was comparable to the dark golden wind lightning. However, Zhao Feng's foundation was far weaker than the wind lightning emperor and the emperor of death. Apart from speed, the emperor of death was stronger than the wind lightning emperor in every other aspect. Zhao Feng suddenly realized that a sovereign lord was less than 10 miles away from the 1,000-yard-wide crater. Some of the sovereigns at the origin core realm had set up arrays to defend against the power of heaven and earth. These people looked in the direction of the 1,000-foot-wide pit with faint excitement and greed. Zhao Feng harumphed coldly and moved his intent. How could he be disturbed while cultivating? Wang, the magnificent power of an emperor gathered in the sky as the heaven-earth Yuan Qi roared and shook everything within 10,000 miles. The figure of a tall male with purple hair suddenly appeared in Zhao Feng's vision. He was surrounded by lightning, and he was like a god of lightning descending from the sky. The massive man's figure was exactly the same as Zhao Feng's. It even possessed a portion of Zhao Feng's true body's strength. Could it be a projection clone of a legendary almighty with supreme power? In the ancient records, only the unreachable void god realm emperors have such abilities. The experts who were approaching the center seemed to have been imprisoned, and their faces were pale with fright. The silhouette of the stalwart man waved his hand, causing the void to tremble. An indescribable power passed through the physical dimension. Wah! The experts that tried to get close all spat out blood, and their minds were injured. Emperor projection. The child demigod murmured. He didn't think that Zhao Feng's soul intent would not only consolidate after being cleansed by the god tribulation lightning, but he would also be able to use a technique exclusive to emperors. Chapter 743. Emperor, please spare us. We were ignorant and disturbed the emperor's rest. The experts nearby were scared out of their wits, and their faces turned pale. The monarch projection in the sky gently raised his hand and injured everyone's body and mind. They were imprisoned by the invisible monarch's mighty power. At this moment, these supreme experts in the region were crawling and trembling like ants. This island is very similar to the Azure Flower continent. Zhao Feng murmured. He suddenly thought of his hometown, the Azure Flower continent. Unknowingly, it had been many years since Zhao Feng left the Azure Flower continent. As for the emperor projection, it was a secret technique that Zhao Feng had secretly learned from Duan Muqing. Anyone with peak soul intent would be able to cultivate it. Fuck off. The projection of the martial monarch in the sky suddenly waved his hand, and the top experts of the realm were flung backward like pieces of paper. A few breaths later, these people were all pushed back 100 miles, and they were all in a ruffled state. The power of an emperor is too terrifying. Everyone's heart shook. Why would a legendary emperor appear in the small bright flower continent? Only a few sovereign lords had seen a void god realm king before. However, there hadn't been a single emperor in the past 10,000 years. Normal 2-star sects didn't have any emperors, and most 2.5-star sects didn't even have one. Usually, only peak 2-star sects would have void god realm emperors. Everyone leave. These supreme experts quickly retreated from the area. If the emperor changed his mind, he could decide their life and death with just a thought. Within a 1,000-yard-wide crater, Zhao Feng sat down cross-legged, and the surprise on the child demigod's face slowly disappeared. This Zhao Feng's bloodline, comprehension, and potential are all shocking. He even managed to absorb the god tribulation lightning. The pressure on the child demigod increased. If this continued, Zhao Feng's future would probably surpass him, who was a peak demigod. Of course, the prerequisite was that Zhao Feng could escape from the pursuit of death. Not good. Zhao Feng, who was sitting cross-legged, suddenly sensed something and looked in the direction of the outer realm. In the next moment, a dark and gloomy ray of light pierced through the energy membrane of bright flower region. Wherever it passed, the world darkened as the cold power of death shrouded the world. That scene was like a star of calamity, a prelude to the darkness of the continent. Will of death. Great Emperor level will. The experts of the Clearflower region, who had just retreated a certain distance, felt as if they had fallen into an abyss. Their lives were no longer in their control. In his field of vision, wherever the dim power of death passed, a myriad of living beings were obliterated. So fast, Zhao Feng and the child demigod looked at each other. The two didn't hesitate, and immediately headed toward the Emperor of Death. Thunderwing's wind flash. A pair of enormous scarlet golden wings unfurled behind Zhao Feng's back. Wind and lightning revolved around him, creating a vast scarlet golden storm of fire and lightning. The storm created by the crimson gold wings was filled with the violent aura of death and calamity. It also had a kind of transcendent power that could destroy everything. Boom! Zhao Feng flew into the air and clashed with the Emperor of Death. Compared to the time at the Sky Sacred Qin Palace, the power of Zhao Feng's offense had increased by half a level. Death Force Field. The Emperor of Death's expression changed slightly as a terrifying pitch-black force field appeared around him and devoured all life force and Yuan Qi. Boom! The peak experts of the Clearflower region felt as if heaven and earth were shaking. It was as if space itself was shaking from the clash. The battle between emperors caused heaven and earth to shatter, and the heaven-earth Yuan Qi turned into a tidal wave. The shockwaves casually landed on the ground and left large pits with a diameter of 1,000 feet. And this was only because Zhao Feng and the Emperor of Death were close to the outside world. If not, a battle between emperors was a disaster for the experts of the Clearflower region. I still can't break through the Death Force field. The scarlet golden wings on Zhao Feng's back fluttered as he fought with the Emperor of Death for a few breaths. With his current offensive power after merging his 3 domains, he could fight against an emperor head-on. Adding on the high mobility of the wings of wind and lightning, he could even take the initiative. However, the Emperor of Death's Death Force field could devour all power under a certain level and convert it into an attack. However, Zhao Feng's scarlet golden wind lightning had merged with the god tribulation lightning, so even the Death Force field could only absorb 50 to 60% of it. However, even then, it was enough to make Zhao Feng feel helpless. Sacred body dominating power. The child demigod's body glowed with a golden light, and his size increased by half. A powerful physical force formed a golden figure in the air that suppressed the Emperor of Death. The dominating power of the sacred body suppressed the Emperor of Death's physical body. The golden Kuan sacred body was extremely strong, and the Emperor of Death's immortal death body didn't specialize in physical strength. Sky ceiling 18 palms. The child demigod thrust out golden palms that twisted heaven and earth and restricted the Emperor of Death. Ceiling Yuan palm. The child demigod's palms spun, and a gray-gold light enveloped the Emperor of Death. The Emperor of Death's expression became solemn as the power of death, and Yuan Qi around him started to slow down. This was the battle power of a peak emperor, and his power of death wasn't simple. If it was a normal king, the majority of their power would be restricted. Sealing Yuan palm. You actually know such a long-lost forbidden technique, even if it's incomplete? The Emperor of Death stared at the child demigod. Although the child demigod wasn't the main battle power, his support made the Emperor of Death's movements restricted. Otherwise, a normal emperor would have been killed by the Emperor of Death already. Scythe of Death. The space around the Emperor of Death trembled as a giant scythe shrouded in black mist appeared in his hand. It was surrounded by a terrifying aura of baleful death. Whoosh! Whoosh! The large scythe of death slashed through heaven and earth, and combined with the force field of death, it forced Zhao Feng and the child demigod back. Wah! The child demigod spat out a mouthful of blood as his secret technique was forcefully broken. Shua! A bloody gash that was half a foot long appeared on Zhao Feng's ice blue scales, but it quickly healed. The air was covered by the scythe of death. If it was a normal king, they would have been killed several times already. However, the attacks of Zhao Feng and the child demigod were converted by the force field of death and strengthened the scythe of death. Too strong. The child demigod was stunned. The Emperor of Death was unstoppable after entering a berserk state. One had to know that. The battle power of Zhao Feng and the child demigod was close to Duanmu Qing's level when they teamed up. The only difference was their foundation. Lightning Wings Spatial Flash. The scarlet golden wings on Zhao Feng's back released a brilliant glow of wind lightning as he turned into an arc of lightning that merged into the air. Shua! Shua! All he could see was a long arc of lightning that pierced through the air. This time, Zhao Feng's mastery of the Lightning Wings Spatial Flash was even higher. The explosive power of his scarlet golden wind lightning was even stronger than the Wind Lightning Emperor's golden wind lightning. This burst of speed allowed him to travel at least 1,000 miles in an instant, and at least 10,000 miles in the outside world. Master, you've become even faster. You're almost as fast as the Wind Lightning Emperor when he was at his peak. The child demigod's voice sounded from the ancient metal ring. Lightning Wings Spatial Flash. Zhao Feng flashed through the limitless ocean once more, and increased the distance between him and the Emperor of Death. Our battle power is close to a peak emperor, but we still can't break through the force field of death, let alone the immortal death body. The Emperor of Death's Eye of Death has some forbidden eye bloodline techniques that he hasn't used yet. Zhao Feng murmured. After the first and second clash, he could feel the Emperor of Death's shocking strength. However, what Zhao Feng didn't know was that the Emperor of Death didn't use the Eye of Death easily because he was wary of the ninth god's eye. Firstly, the Emperor of Death knew that Zhao Feng's god's spiritual eye was almost monstrous against soul attacks. His Eye of Death focused on soul attacks. Secondly, the Emperor of Death was worried that the Eye of Death's attacks would stimulate the ninth god's eye's potential. The more the ninth god's eye was awakened, the lower the chance of his plan succeeding. Due to various reasons, the Emperor of Death couldn't unleash his full strength. If it was a normal peak-tier king or emperor, they would have been killed countless times by the Emperor of Death. Even some peak great monarchs could be defeated and killed. A few days later, Zhao Feng escaped from the Emperor of Death once more and flew for a while. A month later, Zhao Feng passed through several island zones and entered a Void Ocean Spiritual Palace. The Void Ocean Spiritual Palace is a neutral place, and the spiritual sacred land is behind it. Zhao Feng thought. His goal in entering the Void Ocean Spiritual Palace was to rest and replenish his Yuan Qi, including some spiritual pills. Normal supply points didn't have any spiritual pills that could quickly recover a king's strength. Only in the Void Ocean Spiritual Palace would Zhao Feng and the child demigod be able to find what they wanted. Zhao Feng also had another goal, which was to use the Void Ocean Spiritual Palace's position to cultivate here. However, before Zhao Feng and the child demigod could cultivate for 10 days, the Emperor of Death charged into the Void Ocean Spiritual Palace. The Emperor of Death attacked without hesitation. One could imagine what kind of disaster would happen when two Emperor intents clashed in the Void Ocean Spiritual Palace. A battle between emperors. It's the legendary Emperor of Death. The Void Ocean Spiritual Palace was in chaos. The Void Ocean Palace Lord was enraged, but he couldn't do anything. Normal Void Ocean Palace Lords were either half-step kings or kings. Very few were emperors. Emperor of Death, how dare you attack in the Void Ocean Spiritual Palace? Aren't you afraid that the floating dream spiritual zone sacred land will chase after you? Zhao Feng laughed. After saying that, he used another lightning wings spatial flash and disappeared from the Void Ocean Spiritual Palace. The Emperor of Death expressionlessly used the Death Instant Shadow and continued to chase. For the ninth God's Eye, he was willing to offend a sacred land. Furthermore, the spiritual sacred land wasn't united either. The mystic light realm sacred lords were in seclusion most of the time, trying to become a god. The Emperor of Death wasn't scared of the other emperors chasing after him. In the blink of an eye, another 2 months passed. On this day, Zhao Feng entered a familiar island zone, the 10,000 Abyss Islands zone. The most famous place in the 10,000 Abyss Islands zone was the 18 Corners Pirate Sacred Land. I'll be at the 18 Corners Pirate Sacred Land soon. The Cold Moon Emperor is the new Pirate Emperor, and she owes me a favor. Zhao Feng's eyes twinkled. He could faintly feel that his next destination might be a turning point. Chapter 744. A few hours later, Zhao Feng once again arrived at the 18 Corners Pirate Sacred Land. He didn't hide his king's aura. As he flew, his wings created a scarlet golden storm that was hundreds of yards wide. The elite pirates in the 18 Corners Pirate Sacred Land were stunned by Zhao Feng's aura. Some of the experts even recognized Zhao Feng's identity. Whoosh! Whoosh! Zhao Feng's wings flapped as he landed on a pirate king's ship. Zhao Feng, it's you. That pirate king was a new face, a bald-headed king who looked to be in his 30s. Zhao Feng didn't recognize him, but this bald-headed king recognized Zhao Feng. In the Pirate Emperor Inheritance Sacred Land, he had personally witnessed Zhao Feng's display of divine might, directly influencing the throne of the Pirate Emperor. Where is the Cold Moon Emperor? Although Zhao Feng didn't recognize this pirate king, that didn't stop him from asking about the Cold Moon Emperor. The bald-headed king's heart shook when he sensed the grand aura coming from Zhao Feng, and he replied respectfully. Zhao Feng flew in a certain direction with the bald-headed king's guidance. An hour later, Zhao Feng approached a large fortress that was made up of several legendary pirate ships. It was like a small island, and one could see trees and buildings on it. After the new pirate emperor was born, the Pirate Sacred Land teamed up to create this fortress, and it was called the Pirate Imperial Court. The ruler of the Pirate Imperial Court was obviously the new pirate emperor, the Cold Moon Emperor. Zhao Feng's arrival caused the Pirate Imperial Court to become chaotic. It wasn't just the grand aura coming from him that surpassed kings. More importantly, many of the upper echelon of the pirates recognized him. Zhao Feng was soon received by several pirate kings, including the golden-haired male and the bearded middle-aged man. Zhao Feng, you actually have the time to come to the Pirate Imperial Court as a guest? A clear and valiant voice sounded. Within a wave of Emperor's might, a silver-robed woman with flawless icy beauty appeared in front of Zhao Feng. She had a perfect figure, and she had a sword and saber on her back and a crown on her head. The Cold Moon Emperor looked at Zhao Feng with a smile that wasn't a smile. After exchanging a few pleasantries, Zhao Feng suggested talking to the Cold Moon Emperor alone. This action caused some pirates to look at him with ambiguous or jealous gazes. The enviable thing was that the Cold Moon Emperor agreed without hesitation. On top of that, the Cold Moon Emperor, who usually didn't smile, smiled after seeing Zhao Feng. Swoosh! Zhao Feng turned into a gust of wind as he soared into the sky with the will of an emperor. Great monarch will. The upper echelon of the pirate imperial court exclaimed in shock, all of them dumbfounded. The Cold Moon Emperor was surprised, but there was a hint of joy in her eyes. She had to admit that Zhao Feng's growth was faster than she had imagined. No wonder this man wasn't even tempted by the throne of the pirate emperor. A while later, Zhao Feng and the Cold Moon Emperor floated in the air. Even normal kings wouldn't be able to withstand the scorching sun of the immemorial Golden Crow for long. Zhao Feng, you didn't come here just to be a guest, right? The Cold Moon Emperor said. In her mind, Zhao Feng was a cultivation maniac and wasn't interested in worldly battles. Zhao Feng didn't hesitate and told her why he was here. During this process, the Cold Moon Emperor's face would be filled with shock and she would exclaim. It wasn't just the Emperor of Death's fame, but also the fact that Zhao Feng was able to survive for so long and even fight the Emperor of Death head-on. If it wasn't for the fact that I ran fast, I would have died long ago. But now that our strength has grown, we might be able to beat the Emperor of Death. Battle intent started to burn in Zhao Feng's eyes. That battle intent contained a torrential rage that was stifled to the extreme. After being chased for 6 or 7 years, Zhao Feng had never felt such humiliation ever since he started cultivating. Zhao Feng, I owe you a favor. I'll help you with all my strength. Although I can't guarantee victory, I believe it won't be hard for me to protect myself. The Cold Moon Emperor said decisively. In the past, if it wasn't for Zhao Feng's help, she wouldn't have been able to become the Pirate Emperor and become an emperor. The Cold Moon Emperor's tone was filled with confidence. Zhao Feng knew that the Cold Moon Emperor was the new Pirate Emperor and was protected by the Pirate Sacred Land. This was because of the crown on her head, which allowed the Cold Moon Emperor to not fear any emperor for 10 years. Of course, the Cold Moon Emperor couldn't leave the Pirate Sacred Land for 10 years either. This protection was only limited to the 18 Corners Pirate Sacred Land. This was what the first-generation Pirate Emperor had set up in the Heaven's Legacy Secret Realm. That was why. Only then could the Pirate Emperor's throne continue for generations to come. On the same day, Zhao Feng was arranged to stay in a desolate canyon. The entire canyon was a large canyon similar to the 8 Desolate Mountain. The environment of this canyon was extremely bad, and there were storms everywhere. There was basically no one here. On the other hand, there were other superior environments in the canyon region, where the descendants of pirates and some ordinary mortals were stationed. The reason why they chose this place was to prevent the battle between emperors from affecting the innocent. Zhao Feng, rest here for now. If you need anything, you can contact me. The Cold Moon Emperor left behind a message token with a crescent moon symbol. Zhao Feng nodded his head and started to enter seclusion with the child demigod. Along the way, they fought in many places, and their cultivations improved. They had also replenished their resources in the Void Ocean Spiritual Palace. I've absorbed more than 200 wisps of God Tribulation lightning. More than 200 wisps of ancient lightning symbols could be seen in his purple soul sea. They were mysterious and contained an immortal aura. The God Tribulation lightning didn't just increase in quantity. The God Tribulation lightning symbols were also clearer than before. Zhao Feng's comprehension of the Scarlet Gold Wind lightning had reached 50 to 60%, and he had merged more than twice the God Tribulation intent compared to the Sky Sacred Qin Palace. Wang. A layer of ice blue scales appeared on Zhao Feng's body, and the bloodline aura of the 10,000 ancient races became stronger. The increase in one's cultivation and constitution could allow one's bloodline to return to its ancestor. The higher the bloodline, the more potential it had. Ordinary bloodlines could only reach the supremacy or monarch level before reaching the end of their cultivation. However, for bloodlines of the 10,000 ancient races, the origin core realm was just the beginning, and void god realms were only in their infancy. Over the past few days, the bloodline of the mystic ice-scaled race and the god spiritual eye bloodline had grown, and some of its power had awakened. Zhao Feng found that it wasn't just the increase in his cultivation and constitution, but also the ancient dream realm fruits. From the child demigod's desire for the ancient dream realm flesh and spiritual fruits, one could see the effects of the ancient dream realm. Thinking up to here, Zhao Feng took another ancient dream realm fruit and ate it. Only 15 left. In the ancient dream realm, the number of spiritual fruits on the trees became fewer and fewer. 4 or 5 of them had just formed and wouldn't ripen without a few years. In the blink of an eye, half a month passed. Zhao Feng and the child demigod used every second they had to cultivate. After eating 3 ancient dream realm spiritual fruits and using a bunch of resources, Zhao Feng's cultivation finally broke through. Middle stage of the Void God realm. A scarlet golden wave appeared in Zhao Feng's true Yuan dimension, and it had doubled in size compared to when he was at the early stages of the Void God realm. Unknowingly, Zhao Feng's foundation became stronger. With his emperor-level intent and bloodline of the 10,000 ancient races, his recovery speed was extremely strong, and he could even fight against emperors for a long time. The child demigod ate a total of 4 or 5 ancient dream realm spiritual fruits, and his strength quickly recovered. His golden koan sacred body had reached the early stages of the 5th level, and he could challenge emperors with just his physical strength alone. In terms of cultivation, the child demigod was close to the middle stages of the Void God realm. The strength of the master and servant duo had increased greatly. On this day, the Cold Moon Emperor led the 2 peak-tier kings to this desolate canyon. Ever since the Pirate Emperor's inheritance, the strength of some of the older pirate kings had increased by leaps and bounds. These 2 peak-tier kings were the Giant Shark King and the Ghost Scale King. The Giant Shark King was once one of the 3 major pirate leaders, and he had the ancient shark bloodline. His body and bloodline were extremely strong, and he had once been a meat shield against Emperor Mu Yin. Now that the Giant Shark King had obtained the Pirate Emperor's inheritance, his strength had also increased dramatically. The Ghost Scale King was a domain-level king that had survived the battle with Emperor Mu Yin, and his survivability was extremely strong. After obtaining the Pirate Emperor's inheritance, the Ghost Scale King had become a peak-tier king. The Ghost Scale King's body was extremely unique. Not only did he have a high-tier fish scale bloodline, but he also had the ghost spiritual body. Zhao Feng, the Giant Shark King and the Ghost Scale King, are both willing to help you fight against the Emperor of Death. The Cold Moon Emperor said with a smile. Zhao Feng could tell that these 2 peak-tier kings were very confident that their strength surpassed those of the same cultivation, and they could fight against normal emperors together. Their bloodlines were extraordinary, and their survivability was extremely strong. Zhao Feng, I didn't think that there would be a day where we would work together. The Giant Shark King laughed. The 2 peak-tier kings both knew how terrifying Zhao Feng's potential was, and he had the bloodline of the mystic ice-scaled race. On top of that, Zhao Feng had fought against the Emperor of Death a few times, and he had managed to escape each time. With their combined strength, they believed that they would be able to fight against the Emperor of Death. Furthermore, this was the territory of the pirate sacred land. At that time, even if they couldn't defeat the Emperor of Death, it would be enough to win Zhao Feng's friendship and favor. On the same day, the Cold Moon Emperor and the 2 peak-tier kings entered the desolate canyon zone. Zhao Feng and the child demigod continued to cultivate. As the 2 of them cultivated, the aura they emitted faintly caused the 2 kings to click their tongues. 3 days later, with the continuous supply of resources, the child demigod's cultivation had recovered to the middle stages of the Void God realm, and his sacred body gave off a suffocating pressure. The Cold Moon Emperor Zhao Feng and the child demigod, 2 peak-tier kings. There were a total of 5 great experts guarding the place. Zhao Feng had a feeling that the Emperor of Death would soon arrive. At the same time, a muscular male wearing a crown appeared at the edge of the 18 Corners pirate sacred land. He looked to be in his 30s or 40s. Shua, a crystal flower bud appeared in the Emperor of Death's hand, and it quickly turned into a lotus stage several yards wide. On the lotus platform, a slightly effeminate white-eyed girl appeared. Zhao Feng is in the pirate sacred land. This battle is a matter of life and death, and it's the turning point of fate. The white-eyed girl slowly raised her hand. Wang, an image appeared in the air, and it depicted an intense battle. The figure in the middle was the Emperor of Death, and he was being surrounded and attacked by several powerful figures. What was incredible was that the scene in the image was moving. Clearly, the ability of the white-eyed girl's Eye of Destiny had awakened in these years and grown stronger. In the end, the Emperor of Death clashed with a purple-haired young man. A blurry, terrifying figure appeared behind each other. How is this possible? These people can force me to use the shadow of the Death God? The Emperor of Death exclaimed. Chapter 745. Master, the next battle is a matter of life and death, and it will decide fate. No matter if we win or lose, Lin won't be able to help. The white-eyed girl bit her lips. She had helped the Emperor of Death this entire time, and this was her limit. After saying this, the white-eyed girl gave a deep bow and said goodbye to the Emperor of Death. If I stay by Master's side, I'll only be a burden. Furthermore, my fate isn't in the Tsang Ocean, but the continent zone. The white-eyed girl explained. A strange light appeared in her mysterious white eyes as she stared in the direction of the legendary continent zone. Fine, I won't force you. The Emperor of Death looked deeply at her. Without Bai Lin's help, he wouldn't have been able to find Zhao Feng in the Tsang Ocean. On top of that, Bai Lin used all her power to predict what was going to happen next. To a certain degree, the Emperor of Death already had the initiative. Disciple has something to say before I leave. Bai Lin suddenly said. Go ahead. The Emperor of Death didn't have time to think. The owner of a god eye is destined by fate, and it's hard to change it. The ninth god eye seems to be even more unique. I hope that Master won't be too stubborn. Bai Lin thought. Both Bai Lin and the Emperor of Death were descendants of the god eyes. The Eye of Destiny and the God Eye of Destiny were only one word apart. The former was the descendant, while the latter was the ancestor. The Eye of Death was the same. If the Emperor of Death's Eye of Death wanted to become the God Eye of Death, he would have to cultivate it to the limit and kill the God of Death to return to its original form. This was because God Eyes were unique and involved the laws of heaven and earth. However, this method was only in theory. The difficulty was so great that it was almost impossible, and there was no practicality. Bai Lin's words were nothing more than a way to persuade her master not to force things. I understand what you mean. The Emperor of Death paused for a moment before continuing with a fiery tone. But the ninth god's eye hasn't fully awakened, and its master hasn't matured yet. This is the simplest chance to obtain a god eye. If I lose it, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Compared to stealing and replacing other god eyes, this was a chance that only came once in billions of years. Even though it was becoming more and more difficult to kill Zhao Feng, the Emperor of Death wouldn't give up even if there was a sliver of hope. Furthermore, the Emperor of Death had the absolute advantage right now. 18 Corners Pirate Holy Land. A dark, shadowy beam of light pierced through the sea of mist. The cold of death that covered the sky made countless sea creatures tremble in deathly silence. It's the Death Emperor. Along the way, some of the experts on the pirate ships were alarmed. In less than a moment, the Cold Moon Emperor, Zhao Feng, and company in the desolate canyon received the news. In order to deal with the Emperor of Death, the Cold Moon Emperor ordered the upper echelon of the pirate sacred land to be on guard. We're almost there. Zhao Feng turned into a bolt of lightning and flew into the sea of mist. The Cold Moon Emperor, the Child Demigod, the Giant Shark King, and the Ghost Scale King arrived. After a while, a part of the heavens and the earth suddenly fell into darkness, and it reflected an ancient, profound, and mighty figure. Emperor of Death. The hearts of the Cold Moon Martial Emperor and the others skipped a beat. The person who came was the oldest legendary martial emperor of the Ash-Gray Sea, known as the Nightmare of Death. One emperor who just became an emperor and 2 peak-tier kings. Zhao Feng, do you really think that you can kill me with just these people? The Emperor of Death's voice was filled with mockery and indifference. He had already seen the current situation through Bai Lin, who had the Eye of Destiny, and he was prepared. Zhao Feng and company looked at each other. The Emperor of Death didn't seem surprised by what was happening in front of him at all. Emperor of Death, Zhao Feng laughed. Almost all of your subordinates have been slain by me, And your disciple Wen Luan self-destructed right in front of me. Is that why you're so confident? Hearing that, the Emperor of Death's expression became grim. The pressure he had just created instantly crumbled. I'll take revenge for them by killing you. I'll find the eyes of Samsara and make it up to them. But you'll die a horrible death. The smile on the Emperor of Death's face became colder and more deadly. The Cold Moon Emperor and company couldn't help but hiccup. The Emperor of Death wasn't just evil. Not only did he want to kill Zhao Feng for the rest of his life, he also wanted him to live a life worse than death. The atmosphere between the two sides froze. The Emperor of Death suddenly spread his arms, and a sticky, dark dimension of death appeared in the sky. Little world. The Cold Moon Emperor and company felt the power of an unstoppable little world. The endless darkness of the little world of death crazily devoured the heaven-earth Yuanqi nearby, and pulled in the souls of all living beings. The bodies of the child demigod and the two peak-tier kings dropped as they felt a great pressure. The surging power of death formed a ring shape, and kept on expanding, as if it wanted to kill everyone in one fell swoop. The little world of death started to condense in their vision, and it was like a dark abyss. The consequences of being sucked in would be unimaginable. Then I'll break your little world. The Cold Moon Emperor's expression was cold as she slashed out with her sword and blade, causing the air to be sliced apart by a beam of moonlight and blade light. The dazzling and cold rainbow light of the sword and saber slashed open a huge ravine in the dark and deathly silent void. A bottomless crack appeared in the little world of death. The cold rays of light that were intersected by the sword and blade shot out horizontally and vertically, and as they warped, they emanated a crushing force that caused the death dimension to show signs of instability. The Emperor of Death's expression changed slightly. He didn't expect this person to be an emperor that specialized in swords and sabers. When the Cold Moon Emperor was a king, her sharp attacks were one of the strongest even in the pirate sacred land. Although she hadn't formed a small world, her space domain was close to materialization. She compressed it into her sword and saber attacks. Every saber and every sword had a kind of condensed starry sky cold radiance that could cleave the heavens and split the earth. In terms of offense, the Cold Moon Emperor was much stronger than normal emperors. Attacked together, the Giant Shark King and the Ghost Scales King circulated their bloodline power and attacked the little world of death with the battle power of a peak-tier king. Sacred body dominating power. The child demigod's body glowed with a golden light as he grew to the height of an adult. His powerful sacred body formed a golden figure in the air that crushed down on the Emperor of Death and his little world. Rumble. At this moment, the Emperor of Death's little world started to tremble, and many cracks appeared. His own body also sank as he felt the pressure of the sacred body's tyrannical power. The Emperor of Death had underestimated the Cold Moon Emperor and the two peak-tier kings, as well as underestimated the child demigod's growth. The child demigod had reached the middle stages of the void god realm, and his golden Kuan sacred body had reached the early stages of the 5th level. Adding on his transcendent intent, it wouldn't be hard for him to fight against an emperor for a short period of time. I didn't think that a demigod like you would become that brat's slave. The Emperor of Death glanced at the child demigod. The child demigod's movements froze, but he didn't hesitate and continued to attack the little world of death. At this moment, Zhao Feng hadn't even joined the battle yet, but the Emperor of Death's little world of death started to tremble. However, the little world of death was extremely unique. It furiously absorbed the heaven-earth Yuanqi, and all the life forms nearby turned into bones. The attacks from the outside world would be devoured by the little world of death, and turned into its own power to recover or counterattack. It was the same as the principle of the death force field. Even if several emperors teamed up, they wouldn't be able to shatter the little world of death in a short amount of time. The Emperor of Death isn't attacking first like before. He's unleashing his little world of death. He's preparing something. Zhao Feng didn't participate in the attack. He needed to hold back to deal with the Emperor of Death's next move. The little world of death specialized in support and defense, but its offensive capabilities were average. Vengeful spirit of death. The Emperor of Death's eye of death revealed a bottomless whirlpool. In the next instant, several chilling and terrifying auras emanated from the vortex. Woo! A few hair-raising roars rang out from the small world of death. Shwa! Shwa! 3 seemingly corporeal spirits of death shot out from the eye of death. Each of them was at least 100 yards tall. The spirits of death in the middle radiated a magnificent aura that was comparable to an emperor. Emperor spirits of death. Zhao Feng's god's spiritual eye saw these signs. Looking closely, the emperor spirits of death looked like Emperor Mu Yun, but it wasn't completely the same. They seemed to have merged with the aura of other emperors. The other 2 spirits of death gave off soul undulations that were comparable to peak-tier kings. As they screamed, the 3 spirits of death charged out of the little world and leapt toward the Cold Moon Emperor and company. The hearts of the Cold Moon Emperor and company went numb as they felt a piercing pain in their souls. Each of the vengeful spirits was formed from the remnant souls of at least 2 or 3 emperors or kings at the same rank as them. The Cold Moon Emperor, the Giant Shark King, and the Ghost Scales King were pushed back. These 3 spirits of death weren't normal spirits of death. They had the soul of an emperor or king, and their physical attacks were half a level lower. The Cold Moon Emperor had no advantage in terms of the soul, and was suppressed by the emperor spirits of death. The Giant Shark King and the Ghost Scales King were both pushed back by the king spirits of death, and their minds were about to shatter. Just measly spirits of death. Let me kill these 2 kings first. Zhao Feng snickered coldly. Mental energy spike. A large purple mental energy spike shot out from Zhao Feng's left eye, and it was surrounded by a mysterious dark lightning symbol. Boom! One of the king spirits of death was pierced by the mental energy spike, and its soul was instantly destroyed. One had to know. Zhao Feng's mental energy spike contained a wisp of god tribulation lightning that could destroy souls. Everyone was stunned when they saw a peak-tier king spirit of death being destroyed. Just as Zhao Feng was feeling smug, he sensed something, and his expression changed dramatically. Master, save me! The child demigod exclaimed. Gaze of death. The Emperor of Death's pitch-black eyes of death locked onto the child demigod. The child demigod struggled in pain, and a faint golden yuan soul almost left his body. So, the Emperor of Death used the gaze of death, when Zhao Feng used the mental energy spike to kill the spirit of death. His target is the child demigod. Zhao Feng's heart dropped. Only now did he realize that he had fallen into the Emperor of Death's trap. The spirit of death had been summoned to distract Zhao Feng. Although the child demigod's intent was high, his soul was still at the level of a king. It was only his intent and body that were strong. He walked the path of a body cultivator. And even in his previous life, the Tao of the soul was his weakness. Chapter 746. Master, save me! The child demigod started to struggle, and his faint golden yuan soul almost left his body. If it weren't for the fact that his demigod intent were very strong, a normal late-stage void god realm king's soul would have been sucked away by the Emperor of Death already. As long as I take care of this demigod Kuan Yin, Zhao Feng's helpers won't be a problem. The Emperor of Death stood in the little world of death and circulated his eye of death. At the same time, the dark golden crown on his head released a powerful undulation of soul power that increased his Tao of soul techniques. I've been tricked. Zhao Feng's expression became solemn. The demigod Kuan Yin was extremely useful in the fight against the Emperor of Death. The child demigod's sacred body and fist techniques could suppress the Emperor of Death's intent and limit his strength. If they lost the child demigod, Zhao Feng and company would face the Emperor of Death in his peak state. However, the gaze of death was already more than halfway done, and it had already dragged the child demigod out of his body. The Emperor of Death had prepared beforehand and used his little world of death as a barrier. At the same time, he used his Emperor-level vengeful spirits to stall the Cold Moon Emperor. In order to stop the Emperor of Death, I need to charge into the little world of death and break through this barrier. Zhao Feng's thoughts spun. According to this conventional train of thought, it was almost impossible. This was because the child demigod's soul would be sucked away by the gaze of death in just a breath's time. If that's the case, Zhao Feng took a deep breath as a purple eye bloodline power formed a bottomless whirlpool in his left eye. What? The Emperor of Death paused before exclaiming. How is this possible? Shua. The faint golden yuan soul that had just been dragged out froze in midair, as it was pulled by another force. The Emperor of Death's gaze of death felt a strong resistance. Gaze of the God. A bottomless purple whirlpool appeared in Zhao Feng's left eye, and it connected to a misty purple world. A fatal attraction appeared from Zhao Feng's god's spiritual eye. Great! The child demigod was overjoyed as he felt a soul Dao secret technique similar to the gaze of death pull him toward his body. Gaze of the God eye? How dare you steal my death secret technique? The Emperor of Death's smile froze on his face. At this moment his breathing was hurried and his anger surged. He was flustered and exasperated and his face was ashen. Death gaze was his signature secret skill. Yet that kid had actually stolen it. As long as one had a certain level of attainment and understanding of the soul Dao, it was not difficult to absorb the target's soul. The key is the eye bloodline. It's the fulcrum. Zhao Feng's purple hair blew in the wind, as his left eye locked onto the child demigod. Death gaze vs gaze of the God eye. The principles of the two secret skills were basically the same. Furthermore, both of their eye bloodlines leaned towards the soul. Zhao Feng had faced the attack of the gaze of death twice before. The first time was at the Purple Saint Ruins, and the second time was at the edge of the Pirate Sacred Land. Furthermore, Zhao Feng had studied the Emperor of Death's Dark Eye secret technique, and understood the principles behind many Soul Dao techniques and eye bloodline techniques. With the God's spiritual eye's understanding, it wasn't hard for him to create his own gaze of the God eye. In the air, the faint golden yuan soul of the child demigod was slowly returning to his body. Since he had demigod intent, his struggle against the gaze of death was close to that of an emperor. This was the same as saying, the Emperor of Death had to face the combined attacks of the child demigod and Zhao Feng. The child demigod obviously struggled and followed Zhao Feng's direction. Emperor of Death, your Soul Dao eye bloodline techniques will become even more powerful in my hands. Zhao Feng laughed. The Emperor of Death was already extremely angry, and he almost spat out a mouthful of blood when he heard this. Shua. The faint golden yuan soul of the child demigod returned to his body, and started to defend it with Zhao Feng's help. In order to prevent the Emperor of Death from attacking further, Zhao Feng circulated his eye bloodline power, and set up a layer of God tribulation lightning around the child demigod's yuan soul. If the Emperor of Death tried to do anything to the child demigod, he would suffer the backlash of the God tribulation lightning. At the very least, it wouldn't go as smoothly. Master, it's lucky that you helped in time. The child demigod let out a long breath. On the other side, the Cold Moon Emperor, the Giant Shark King, and the Ghost Scales King were slowly gaining the upper hand against the spirits of death. The spirits of death mainly used the Tao of the soul, and their physical attacks weren't strong. After the Cold Moon Emperor and company familiarized themselves with the attacks of the spirits of death, they started to learn how to deal with them. The Giant Shark King and the Ghost Scales King teamed up and beat one of the spirits of death into howling. The Ghost Scales King had the body of a ghost, so he had strong resistance against the attacks of the spirits of death. Zhao Feng and the child demigod didn't hesitate and started to attack the little world of death. Scarlet Gold Exploding Fist. Zhao Feng circulated the scarlet gold wind lightning and punched out, causing his vision to be filled with a scarlet gold storm of lightning and fire. In an instant, the dark dimension was dyed red by the scarlet gold light and started to shake. Zhao Feng's punch contained the power of 3 spatial domains and smashed into the little world of death. Boom! Crack! Cracks started to appear on the surface of the little world of death, and a hole several miles wide appeared. The scarlet gold exploding fist contained the element of fire within the scarlet gold wind lightning, and it also contained the power of God tribulation lightning. Not good. The Emperor of Death's expression changed dramatically. The little world of death he was in was heavily injured, and large cracks started to appear. At this moment, Zhao Feng's soul had absorbed 200 to 300 wisps of God Tribulation lightning, and his aura was even more condensed than before. The power of the God Tribulation lightning and destruction intent was unimaginable, and it was difficult to repair. The Emperor of Death's little world also used a vast true yuan dimension as its core. Normally he could repair the little world with his own power. However, the God Tribulation lightning's power of destruction had damaged the little world's foundation, and it was a permanent injury. Emperor of Death, I'll destroy your little world first. Zhao Feng roared as he unleashed a barrage of attacks. A pair of scarlet gold wings spread behind his back as he spun around the little world of death and attacked furiously. The wings of wind and lightning increased his power, and the advantage in speed allowed Zhao Feng to retreat and advance as he pleased. Sealing Yuan Palm. Sky Sealing 18 Palms. The child demigod used a legendary secret technique to greatly restrict the Emperor of Death's strength. Under the child demigod's attacks, the flow of Yuan Qi within the little world of death started to freeze, and the power of the little world was restricted. How is this possible? The Death Emperor was extremely enraged as he watched his little world being destroyed by the chains. Compared to last time, both Zhao Feng and the child demigod's strength had increased by an incredible amount. This was especially so for Zhao Feng. He had cultivated the scarlet gold wind lightning, and he had absorbed 200 to 300 wisps of God Tribulation lightning. Zhao Feng focused on the flaws of the little world of death and destroyed it deeply. His God's spiritual eye could also see more and more flaws in the Emperor of Death's little world. Death Force Field. The Emperor of Death's little world started to fade, and it was replaced by a terrifying pitch-black force field that devoured all the life force and power nearby. The range of the Death Force Field was smaller, so it couldn't unleash the full power of the little world. However, this secret technique was extremely strong, and it could absorb and reverse attacks. However, the power of Zhao Feng's scarlet gold wind lightning wasn't the same as before, and it contained even more God Tribulation lightning. Rumble. The Death Force Field started to tremble, and the absorption rate of Zhao Feng's attacks dropped to less than 30%. The power of the God Tribulation lightning countered almost everything in heaven and earth. Even the power of death countered the power of God Tribulation lightning. So how could it be absorbed? Every time they clashed, the Emperor of Death's Death Force Field would tremble and expend more energy. Sealing Yuan Palm. The child demigod's attacking style also started to change. The Sealing Yuan Palm restricted all kinds of Yuan Qi, and when it reached a certain level, it could restrict all the Yuan Qi in an area. At that point in time, only the power of one's body wouldn't be restricted. This secret technique and his cultivation were unparalleled. The Death Force Field was essentially a form of energy, and under the origin restricting palm, it appeared to wither and dim to a certain extent, and its power decreased sharply. Scythe of Death. The Emperor of Death counterattacked, and a giant scythe surrounded by black mist appeared in his hand. Whoosh! Whoosh! The giant scythe of death slashed toward Zhao Feng and the child demigod. However, under the restriction of the origin sealing palm, the Emperor of Death's Yuan Qi felt like it was stagnating, whether it was attacking or defending. Ding! Bam! Sparks flew from Zhao Feng and the child demigod. Both of their physiques and defenses had reached a monstrous level. Zhao Feng had the bloodline of the Mystic Ice-scaled race, so he had a Mystic Ice domain that could freeze everything that got close to him. The ice-blue scales on his body were extremely strong. The child demigod's golden koan sacred body had reached the early stages of the 5th level, and even peak-tier kings would find it hard to break through his defense. As long as he was together with Zhao Feng, they would be able to deal with the Emperor of Death's counterattack. Watch me destroy your Death Force Field. Zhao Feng moved quickly with the child demigod, and a scarlet golden spear several hundred yards long condensed in his hand. The scarlet golden wind lightning appeared in the shape of a spear, and its power was condensed. Whoosh! The scarlet golden spear radiated an aura of destruction and the power of God Tribulation lightning as it pierced holes in the Death Force Field. Cracks started to appear on the surface of the death force field, and it started to show signs of becoming unstable. Ding! Dang! Dang! The Emperor of Death waved his scythe of death and clashed with Zhao Feng's scarlet golden spear, creating a forbidden power that could annihilate everything. Retreat! The expressions of the giant shark king and the ghost-scaled king changed dramatically as they started to retreat. What shocking power! The Cold Moon Emperor felt the clash between Zhao Feng and the Emperor of Death, who were both peak emperors. Even she had to give way a little. The remaining king-ranked vengeful spirit was already covered in injuries, and it was instantly destroyed in the battle. The Emperor of Death focused on fighting Zhao Feng and the child demigod, so he didn't have time to care about the vengeful spirits. The more he fought, the more shocked he became. Zhao Feng's strength had increased by a terrifying amount. His scarlet golden wind lightning had already surpassed the Wind Lightning Emperor's system, and his battle power was even stronger than the Wind Lightning Emperor when he was at his peak. At least, the Wind Lightning Emperor hadn't merged the power of God Tribulation Lightning into it. This Zhao Feng already has the strength of a peak emperor. The Cold Moon Emperor and the two peak tier kings were stunned. Chapter 747. Zhao Feng's current battle power wasn't any weaker than a peak emperor's. The Scarlet Gold Wind Lightning had merged with the power of God Tribulation Lightning and surpassed the Wind Lightning Emperor's cultivation system. The Mystic Ice-Scaled race had a bloodline of the 10,000 ancient races and a powerful physical defense. God's Spiritual Eye. The potential of the ninth God's Eye made the Emperor of Death wary. The only thing he lacked was his foundation. After all, most Void God Realm Emperors had lived for a very long time. In the air above the limitless ocean, the battle between Zhao Feng and the Emperor of Death became extremely intense. Of course, the child demigod's use couldn't be ignored. Because of him, the Emperor of Death's techniques were restricted, and he couldn't use his full battle power. The Emperor of Death felt extremely frustrated. His biggest trump card, the Eye of Death, was countered by the ninth God's Eye to a certain degree. Just now, when the gaze of death and the gaze of the God Eye clashed, his eye bloodline trembled. He didn't dare to use the Eye of Death easily, because he was worried that it would awaken the ninth God's Eye. Boom! A shocking explosion sounded from not far away, and a scream sounded in the soul dimension. The remaining Emperor-level vengeful spirit had been killed by the combined forces of the Cold Moon Emperor and company. Attacked together. The Cold Moon Emperor, the Giant Shark King, and the Ghost Scales King, the three strongest leaders of the pirate sacred land, charged over. None of them were easy to deal with. The Giant Shark King and the Ghost Scales King had unique bloodlines, and their battle power was close to an emperor's. Their defense and survivability were especially strong. At this moment, just as the white-eyed girl had predicted, the Emperor of Death was surrounded. Why? The Emperor of Death felt an unstoppable force. He was prepared for this, but it didn't change in the end. The addition of the Cold Moon Emperor and company put the Emperor of Death at a disadvantage for the first time. Peerless Sword and Saber. The Cold Moon Emperor's sword and saber intertwined and formed a storm of swords and sabers. Wang Shu. The storm of swords and sabers spun at a high speed. Countless particles of cold light were like mercury, penetrating the void of the world. Everywhere it passed, everything was cut up and twisted into dust particles. The Emperor of Death's force field started to crack even more as the peerless sword and saber cut into it. The Cold Moon Emperor was very courageous and directly leapt towards the death force field. Everyone was shocked. The Emperor of Death sneered. Charging into the death force field at such a close distance was no different from courting death. The death force field possessed powerful devouring and backlash abilities. However, a shocking scene appeared. The pirate crown on the Cold Moon Emperor's head gave off a mysterious connection with the 18 Corners pirate sacred land. All of a sudden, the Cold Moon Emperor's body was enveloped in a dazzling rainbow light. The protection of that power increased her defense by more than 10 times. Boom! The Cold Moon Emperor's storm of blades and swords charged into the death force field and clashed. No matter who won or lost, the Cold Moon Great Emperor was undefeatable. The protection of the pirate sacred land. Only then did the Emperor of Death remember that the Cold Moon Emperor was the new pirate emperor and was protected by the pirate sacred land. One had to know. The Cold Moon Emperor was an emperor that specialized in offense. Now that she had the protection of the sacred land, she was undefeatable and would be extremely difficult to deal with. Boom! The 5 experts teamed up and finally caused the death force field to shatter into pieces. Bam! The instant the death force field collapsed, the Emperor of Death suffered a backlash and was pushed back a few miles. Even though he had the immortal death body, he was still at a disadvantage. Before he could stabilize his body, a voice rang out. Wind lightning wings slash. A pair of scarlet golden wings of lightning appeared out of nowhere in front of the Emperor of Death, and the scorching glow of the wings sliced right into the Emperor of Death. Shoo! The scarlet golden wind lightning wings slash released the aura of God Tribulation lightning and exploded on the Emperor of Death's body. A bone-deep gash was left on the Emperor of Death's body. If it wasn't for the fact that he had the immortal death body, a normal emperor would either die or be crippled. The Emperor of Death groaned in pain. He was injured quite badly. The scariest thing was that the God Tribulation lightning and the power of destruction were almost permanent and couldn't be healed. Restricting Yuan Palm, Sword and Blade Rainbow, the Child Demigod, and the Cold Moon Emperor charged over from another direction. The Death Emperor had no choice but to summon his little world of death to resist the attacks from the crowd. However, this was just to stall for time. Under the combined attacks of the 5 experts, the little world of death wouldn't be able to last for long. In just a few breaths' time, the little world of death started to crack and crack, some of which were left behind from before. Don't let him run. Zhao Feng and the Cold Moon Emperor looked at each other before charging into the little world of death. Under normal situations, entering the enemy's little world would put them in a disadvantageous situation. However, the little world of death was full of cracks and flaws, so Zhao Feng and the Cold Moon Emperor weren't scared. The Cold Moon Emperor was protected by the pirate sacred land and was undefeatable, so she obviously wasn't worried. Ice Imperial Spear. A layer of ice blue liquid flowed out of Zhao Feng's bloodline and formed a dark blue ice armor that covered his body. This was another layer of ice imperial armor on top of his mystic ice scaled race bloodline. Frozen heaven and earth. Zhao Feng roared as he released the full power of his 10,000 ancient races bloodline. A surge of blue coldness instantly froze the space around them. In the small world of death, a scene of ice and snow appeared. The power of the small world was also frozen to a certain extent, and was further weakened. Unparalleled sword and saber. The Cold Moon Great Emperor swung her sword and blade around, creating a storm of blades and swords. Silver-like particles of light filled the air and pierced through the air. Wherever the two of them passed, the matter in the small world would shatter into pieces. Rumble. The Emperor of Death's little world started to tremble. It wasn't far from disintegrating, and parts of it started to shatter. Soon, Zhao Feng and the Cold Moon Emperor charged toward the Emperor of Death. In this dimension, the Emperor of Death was protected by the little world. Unfortunately, the little world of death was on the verge of collapsing and couldn't provide much help to him. They forced me to this step. As expected of the owner of the 9th God's Eye, the Emperor of Death sighed. His pitch-black eyes spun and released an aura of death that could pierce through heaven and earth. I can't do this by myself. Zhao Feng didn't let his guard down. Although the Emperor of Death had suffered a great loss and was injured, he still retained at least 95% of his battle power. Boom! Crack! Under everyone's pincer attack, the small world of death began to peel off and split apart, producing bursts of explosive power. The 3 of them stood in the pitch-black dimension, but they weren't injured at all. Both the Emperor of Death and Zhao Feng's physical defense had reached an unbelievable level. The Cold Moon Emperor's physical defense was weaker, but she was protected by the pirate sacred land. Shadow of the God of Death. The Emperor of Death's pitch-black eyes started to burn with the power of death, and a cold flame appeared in them. Burning eye bloodline power? Zhao Feng was stunned. The Emperor of Death's body was covered in a cold flame of death. Whoosh! After the flame of death covered the Emperor of Death's body, it expanded and turned into a giant shadow of death. That's Zhao Feng and the Cold Moon Emperor's hearts shook as they felt a forbidden aura of death that ruled over heaven and earth. Heaven and earth became deathly silent. Woo! The giant shadow of death, made of illusory death flames, held a giant scythe in its hand as it merged with the dark, silent world. At this moment, everyone's hearts shook as if they were covered by the shadow of the god of death. Suddenly, the eyes of the giant shadow of death slowly opened, shooting out two beams of death light. It was a cold divine light that seemed to dominate life and death, as if it was looking down on all living things in the world. Shadow of the god of death. Could this be the power of the legendary owner of the god of death's eye? The god of death? Zhao Feng and company felt their souls being suppressed, and all of their power seemed to be restricted. In their vision, the shadow of the god of death started to condense and radiate a forbidden aura of death that caused everything within 10,000 miles to fall into darkness. At this moment, the life and death of all living beings were controlled by the god of death. The shadow of the god of death uses the bloodline of the eyes of death to summon a wisp of the god of death's power. Zhao Feng, I didn't think that you would actually force me to this step. The Emperor of Death revealed a painful expression as he was enveloped by the shadow of the god of death. The shadow of the god of death was burning his bloodline and eye bloodline power at every second. Luckily, victory was his. God of Death's eye. This is a wisp of the god's eye's power. The Cold Moon Emperor, the child demigod and company were stunned. They couldn't control their souls anymore. The eyes of the death god's shadow were able to control their souls and life and death just by looking down. The only one struggling was Zhao Feng. The mystic ice-scaled race bloodline within his body started to tremble uneasily. After all, this was a wisp of the god of death's power. Zhao Feng circulated his mystic ice-scaled race bloodline to the maximum and started to burn. A thick layer of ice-blue dragon scales covered his body. In the next instant, the roar of a dragon sounded, and the image of an enormous ice-blue dragon appeared behind Zhao Feng. The power of an ancient mystic dragon shook heaven and earth, and a blinding light smashed against heaven and earth that had fallen into darkness. This is the power of the 10,000 ancient races bloodline awakening. Zhao Feng was surprised. This move came from his bloodline inheritance, and he didn't expect it to be used in this situation. However, facing the roar of the mystic ice dragon, the flaming shadow of the god of death didn't move. The fear and despair of being controlled by the mystic ice dragon was still present. The scythe in the shadow of the god of death's hand suddenly slashed down. Instantly, half of the Cold Moon Emperor's soul left her body. Even though the child demigod and the two peak-tier kings weren't within the attack range, their souls seemed to be restricted and could leave their bodies at any moment. Only Zhao Feng was able to resist it. His god's spiritual eye was extremely resilient against soul-based attacks and techniques. Pung, pung, pung. A rapid thumping sound came from Zhao Feng's left eye. The ancient god is broken, and the ancient god is turned to dust. A desolate sigh seemed to pass through time and space and resounded in Zhao Feng's ears. Boom! The dimension of his left eye shook as Zhao Feng's eye bloodline power started to boil. A faint purple flame covered Zhao Feng's body. Within the faint purple flames, the shadow of an ancient fiend god that covered the heavens and earth was born. A grand aura from the ancient god swept over, and the actions of the shadow of the god of death froze. Chapter 748. The figure of the ancient god demon covered the sky, and it was formed from faint purple flames that radiated a grand aura of the ancient era. Zhao Feng felt his eye bloodline power quickly burn, and he revealed a painful expression. He finally understood why the Emperor of Death would only use the shadow of the death god, if he had no other choice. Shua! The Cold Moon Emperor's soul suddenly returned to her body, and she was covered in cold sweat. Even with the protection of the pirate sacred land, she wasn't truly unrivaled. Even mystic light realm sacred lords would be wary of the Emperor of Death's shadow when he used it without caring about the price. Wang, the figure of the ancient god demon, stood on Zhao Feng's body, but its outline was blurry. He could only tell from its aura and certain signs that it was the phantom of a fiend god from the primordial era. At this moment, the figure of the mystic ice-scaled race's mystic ice dragon around Zhao Feng trembled and circled around the figure of the ancient god demon. In the air, the power of the shadow of the death god and the figure of the ancient god demon clashed, and the shockwave sent the Cold Moon Emperor flying. Bam! The Cold Moon Emperor retreated 100 miles with a pale white face. If it weren't for the fact that she had the protection of the pirate sacred land, a normal peak emperor would have been severely injured even if they didn't die. Although the child demigod and the other 2 peak tier kings were far away, they were still sent flying like pieces of paper. Boom! Boom! The 2 enormous illusory figures separated from their masters and clashed in the air above the mist sea. Explosions sounded, and flames swept across the soul dimension. In his senses, there was an illusion of space swaying and overlapping. It's the power of the bloodline awakening. The child demigod was stunned. The shadow of the death god was a wisp of the death god's eye's power that the Emperor of Death had activated through his eye bloodline. In essence, it was a power that stimulated the origin of the bloodline beyond its level. The figure of the ancient god demon behind Zhao Feng had activated the power of the god demon's eye that hadn't awakened yet. The difference was, Zhao Feng was the first-generation ancestor. Crack! Whoosh! The 2 giant shadows in the sky above the ethereal sea became dimmer every time they collided. Meanwhile, Zhao Feng and the Emperor of Death's complexions would become weaker. Bang! Crack! The image of the primordial god fiend surrounded by the profound ice dragon smashed the Grim Reaper's image into pieces. However, the figure of the ancient god fiend also became extremely dim and crashed into the Emperor of Death with a boom. Not good. The Emperor of Death flew back, but the crown on his head and the undying death body blocked most of the damage for him. Kacha! The shadow of the primordial fiend god and the shadow of the profound ice dragon dissipated at the same time. Zhao Feng's expression was weak. This method of activating the origin of one's bloodline was based on burning one's life force and eye bloodline power. He could feel that his eye bloodline power was showing signs of weakening. Death shadow. The Emperor of Death turned into a dark ray of light and disappeared from everyone's sight. In terms of speed, the Death instant shadow was inferior to the lightning wing's spatial flash, but its strangeness was extraordinary. He's so fast. The Cold Moon Emperor and company hadn't even reacted yet. At the same time, everyone felt relieved. It wasn't easy to force the Emperor of Death to such a degree. Sky-locking bow. Zhao Feng's eyes flashed as he held a dark silver bow with mysterious carvings on it. Wang, a dazzling scarlet gold light arrow appeared on the bowstring. Surrounded by wind and lightning, an indestructible and sharp aura of metal pierced through the air. In the next instant, the Emperor of Death, who had escaped several thousand miles away, felt a sharp aura lock onto him. In fact, he even felt that the void he was in seemed to be locked down. Even the Death instant shadow escape technique felt like it was being shackled. The Skylock bow, as the name suggested, could lock a part of the void. Zhao Feng's intent had reached this level. Whoosh! The scarlet golden arrow seemed to jump out of space and stabbed into the Emperor of Death's heart. Sky. Locking. Bow. The Emperor of Death's body froze as the scarlet golden arrow almost pierced through his heart. If that was all, he wouldn't be scared of the immortal death body. However, the scarlet golden arrow contained the power of wind lightning and the laws of God tribulation lightning. Even the immortal death body was countered by it. Death instant shadow. The Emperor of Death almost burned his true yuan to escape even faster. If he stayed in the pirate sacred land, he wouldn't be able to escape death. After all, there was still the Cold Moon Emperor and the other pirate kings. Once I escape, I'll definitely refine all my enemies into vengeful spirits of death when I return in the future. The Emperor of Death was filled with hatred and humiliation. As the oldest emperor in the Tsang Ocean, He had gone through 2 reincarnations. Apart from a handful of mystic light realm sacred lords, he was unrivaled at the peak of emperors. When had he ever suffered such a crushing defeat and humiliation? Right at this moment, whoosh! The second scarlet golden arrow pierced through the air and landed on his head. The Emperor of Death groaned as his body shook. However, this time he was on guard. A layer of dark markings of death appeared around his body, increasing the defense of the immortal death body. Zhao Feng shot a total of 3 arrows, until the Emperor of Death was out of range. Cold Moon Emperor, Giant Shark King, King Ghost Scales, thank you for your help. I will repay you in the future. Zhao Feng said in a solemn tone. He took a deep breath and circulated his bloodline True Yuan to recover faster. The child demigod stood next to him and looked in the direction that the Emperor of Death escaped in. Zhao Feng, are you going to chase after the Emperor of Death? The Cold Moon Emperor asked with surprise. Everyone had worked hard to defeat the Emperor of Death. If Zhao Feng chased after the Emperor of Death by himself, it would be dangerous. I can't give the Emperor of Death a chance to live. I'll return the humiliation to him double. Zhao Feng's expression was firm. Shua, pa. A pair of scarlet golden wings formed behind Zhao Feng's back, and the child demigod entered the ancient metal ring. Lightning wings spatial flash. A long narrow arc of lightning flashed through the misty sea in Nie Tian's vision. Zhao Feng's speed was even faster than the Emperor of Death. With Zhao Feng's strength and speed, he shouldn't be at a disadvantage as long as he doesn't let his guard down. The Cold Moon Emperor let out a breath. Zhao Feng had the battle power of a peak emperor, and his speed was unparalleled. Most importantly, he wasn't scared of the Eye of Death. This was something that other emperors couldn't do. Furthermore, Zhao Feng had the sky-locking bow. Within the limitless ocean, a dark, shadowy ray of light and a rainbow-like arc of lightning entangled one after the other. Zhao Feng's lightning wings spatial flash had the advantage in terms of speed. Every time he entered attack range, Zhao Feng would pull back the sky-locking bow and shoot an arrow. Shua. The Emperor of Death harumphed. All he could do was strengthen his defense and reduce the damage from the sky-locking bow to the lowest. Because the attacks from the sky-locking bow couldn't be dodged unless there was a huge difference in cultivation. However, Zhao Feng's sky-locking bow and the god's spiritual eye couldn't be dodged once they locked onto the target. However, every time Zhao Feng attacked, he would need to pause or slow down a bit. Every time the Emperor of Death was hit, he would use the momentum to increase the distance between them. I still can't find a way to counter the immortal death body. Zhao Feng's eyebrows furrowed. The Emperor of Death had the immortal body. The immortal body was said to be undying, and its defense and recovery speed were monstrous. If it wasn't for the fact that Zhao Feng merged the god Tribulation Lightning into it, he wouldn't have had any hope of killing the Emperor of Death. However, there was a limit to Zhao Feng's god Tribulation Lightning, and he couldn't use it endlessly. The immortal death body didn't have any weak points, so it was basically a walking corpse with an immortal body. The Emperor of Death had the power of death, and when he was in a walking corpse state, his recovery speed surpassed that of an emperor. A few days later, Zhao Feng chased after the Emperor of Death and entered another island zone. His breathing was rough, and he was extremely weak. The Emperor of Death was in an even worse state, and his body was covered in injuries. Whoosh! Zhao Feng turned into a streak of scarlet lightning and landed on an island filled with Yuan Qi to rest. The Emperor of Death's injuries are much heavier than mine, but his foundation and true Yuan far surpass mine. Zhao Feng's eyes twinkled. He ate a spiritual fruit from the ancient dream realm, and ate a few recovery spiritual pills to speed up his recovery. Master, you can start from another direction and attack the Emperor of Death from the soul dimension. The child demigod reminded. Soul domain? Zhao Feng fell into deep thought. His god eye was a soul-type god eye, and the Emperor of Death was also leaning towards this. The soul is the origin of all living beings. Even if you managed to break the immortal death body, it would still be difficult for you to stop the Emperor of Death's reincarnation. The child demigod explained. That's right. Zhao Feng nodded. In fact, he had also thought of starting from the soul level. However, the Emperor of Death's mastery in the Tao of Soul was shocking, and he had the Eye of Death. Furthermore, the dark golden crown he was wearing was a soul path treasure. It could strengthen soul path secret techniques, soul path defenses, and soul recovery. Although it's a little difficult, this is the most thorough path to extinction. Zhao Feng made a decision. His eye bloodline was at the level of a god eye, and he had absorbed the power of the god tribulation lightning in his soul. This was his advantage over the Emperor of Death. Thunderwing's spatial flash. After resting for half a day, Zhao Feng immediately headed into the limitless ocean to continue his pursuit. Although his cultivation wasn't as strong as the Emperor of Death's, he still had an Emperor intent and a 10,000 ancient races bloodline. In terms of recovery speed, he was stronger than the Emperor of Death. Half a day is enough for the Emperor of Death to run a certain distance. Zhao Feng's eyes twinkled, but he remained calm and confident. He immediately opened his god's spiritual eye and started to follow the aura left behind by the Emperor of Death. The god's spiritual eye could see the essence of things, and its analysis was extremely strong. This was also why Zhao Feng could copy other people's secret techniques. In terms of tracking, it was top tier. Furthermore, Zhao Feng had the little thieving cat's divination ability. He purposely left a wisp of the Emperor of Death's eye intent in his soul sea in order to take revenge one day. Soon, Zhao Feng confirmed a direction and used the Thunderwing's spatial flash. He firmly believed that the Emperor of Death, who was severely injured and had lost a lot of energy, needed to rest more than him. Chapter 749. Above the limitless ocean, a dark streak of light entered an island that was filled with yuan qi and was much larger than the azure flower continent. An hour later, on the island in a 1.5-star sect, shrill and miserable cries resounded without end. The Emperor of Death stood in the air above the sect, and his shattered little world of death covered the entire sect. Emperor, why did you slaughter my clan? A sovereign at the Origin Core realm knelt on the ground with red eyes and a trembling voice. The Luoling clan has no enmity with you. Please let us live. The other sovereign lord begged. Even a shattered little world wasn't something a 1.5-star clan could block. In the eyes of the Emperor of Death, those who hadn't reached the 2-star level were just a bunch of ants. Tentacles of Death. The Emperor of Death's body was surrounded by a black mist of death that spat out pitch-black tentacles. These tentacles instantly wrapped around those at the True Spirit realm and Origin Core realm in the little world of death. In an instant, the life force of those at the True Spirit realm and Origin Core realm started to fade. On the other hand, the Emperor of Death's pale face started to recover. The Emperor of Death's yuan qi was replenished. The tentacles of death was a healing technique of his, devouring the life force of others to heal his own injuries and replenish his own yuan qi. The greatest advantage of this kind of death-healing secret technique that harmed oneself to benefit others was its speed. The downside was that the yuan qi replenished wasn't pure and needed time to refine. If one absorbed too much, it would affect their own true yuan. Furthermore, the healing wasn't complete, especially for fatal injuries. If one relied too much on it, it would leave hidden injuries. Even with these small flaws, the touch of death was a quick method to absorb the energy of others and heal oneself. It was still heaven-defying. Less than an hour later, the 1.5-star clan called the Luoling clan was destroyed by the Emperor of Death. I've recovered 40 to 50% of my yuan qi, but my injuries aren't perfect. The Emperor of Death murmured. The Luoling clan was a pile of white bones. For an emperor like him, he needed to be at least at the Origin Core realm to use the tentacles of death. Several hours later, the Emperor of Death had destroyed another 1-star sect. His yuan qi had recovered to 60 to 70%. The recovery of my injuries is a little slow, the Emperor of Death frowned. Injuries caused by great Emperor realm experts and their comprehensions of the mystical powers weren't something that could be easily healed. Not to mention that Zhao Feng's Crimson Gold Tempest contained the flame thunder annihilation and the profound meaning of the divine tribulation. I need to find some kings to speed up my recovery. Thinking to there, the Emperor of Death quickly left the island. From the soul of an origin core realm sovereign lord, he found that there was a 2-star sect in a nearby island zone. The Emperor of Death naturally didn't care about ordinary 2-star sections. Half a day later, in a 2-star sect called the Burning Sky sect. Emperor of Death, why did you invade my sect for no reason? A burly man shrouded in blue flames roared. The mountain gate of the Burning Heaven sect was filled with miserable screams. The Emperor of Death unleashed his shattered little world and sucked in the experts at the origin core realm and above. Tentacles of Death. The Emperor of Death's pitch-black eyes locked onto the burly male in blue flames. The latter's soul seemed to be frozen, and he couldn't resist at all. Soon, the tentacles of death wrapped around the burly male in blue flames and started to suck out his life force. Emperor of Death, stop. The sound of flying sounded from afar. 2 or 3 Void God Realm kings arrived one after another. One of them was a peak-tier king. She was an elegant and beautiful woman. The Emperor of Death was slightly surprised. He didn't expect reinforcements to arrive so quickly. So, the Emperor of Death's whereabouts had been exposed when he slaughtered 2 1-star sects on the island. Between these 2-star sects, there were long-distance communication methods. Good. 3 or 4 Void God Realm kings, and a peak-tier king should be enough for me to recover. The Emperor of Death roared into the sky. After saying this, he circulated the power of his little world of death and charged toward the kings. The skin of the burly male in blue flames started to wither as his life force started to leak. The expressions of the 3 changed dramatically, but they didn't hesitate to charge toward the Emperor of Death. The Emperor of Death was covered in injuries, and his little world had been shattered. Only then did they have the courage to fight. Emperor of Death, you shouldn't kill like this and make enemies everywhere. My brother is Emperor Luoyu. I believe you've heard of him before. The woman in the palace robe was dignified and beautiful, charming but not bewitching. The Emperor of Death snickered coldly. You're full of fake morals. In the same situation, you people of the righteous Tao would probably be even more ruthless than me. The Emperor of Death wasn't an idiot, and he wouldn't make enemies everywhere. In fact, he understood this very well. Before he tried to take over another body, he had made too many enemies and was killed by the combined forces of several peak emperors. However, due to the situation, the Emperor of Death had to use extreme methods to recover from his injuries. This was the only way he could survive and turn things around in this death hunt. Bam! Boom! The 3 kings clashed with the Emperor of Death. The Emperor of Death easily crushed the 3 kings, even though he was fighting 1 against 3. On top of that, he was also using the tentacles of death to absorb the life force of the origin core realms and Void God Realm kings. The Emperor of Death was still holding back. If he made a mistake and killed these kings, he would lose his value. The Emperor of Death is still able to easily suppress us even though he's heavily injured. The expressions of the 3 kings were solemn. At the same time, the 3 of them were shocked. Just what kind of battles had the Emperor of Death gone through to the point where he had no other choice but to kill his clan to recover his strength? Right at this moment, the large male in blue flames was sucked away by the tentacles of death, and he turned into a pair of bones. It's your turn now. The Emperor of Death licked his lips. The tentacles of death were much more effective on Void God Realm kings. The hearts of the 3 kings went cold, and they started to think about retreating. Limitless death. The Emperor of Death laughed as a bottomless abyss appeared in his eye of death, and a lethal coldness enveloped the 3 kings. Arg! The 3 kings screamed as they fell into a limitless ocean of death. We've been hit by the eye of death's death illusion, the female in the dress exclaimed. However, no matter how the 3 kings struggled, they were unable to escape, and their souls were being corroded by the power of death. Tentacles of death. The Emperor of Death's figure appeared above the 3 kings, and tentacles of death wrapped around them. At the same time, in reality, the 3 kings were being wrapped around by the tentacles of death and were struggling. The female in the dress was barely able to wake up, but the Emperor of Death pressed his hand on her shoulder. The coldness of death even restricted her consciousness. So this is the strength of an ancient peak emperor. The woman's beautiful face was pale, and her heart was filled with bitterness. Even though the Emperor of Death was injured and his little world had shattered, he wasn't someone they could deal with. Just as the three kings and the two-star faction were about to be slaughtered, whoosh! A streak of lightning that was as dazzling as a shooting star shot through the void sea and approached them. The aura of wind lightning from the destructive fire explosion shook heaven and earth. "It's here so quickly," the Emperor of Death exclaimed as his hand on the female's shoulder froze. The woman in the palace dress revealed a trace of shock on her beautiful face. Then she saw a trace of hope in her heart. It all depended on the situation. The Emperor of Death was being chased by a terrifying expert, and he had to slaughter everyone to recover from his injuries. Whoosh! An invincible and sharp metal aura pierced through the air first. The female's face went white, and her soul started to tremble. The area she was in seemed to be locked down by some kind of power. It was as if she couldn't dodge no matter what she did. Whoosh! The female in the dress only felt blood splatter. A half-transparent scarlet golden arrow of light pierced into the Emperor of Death's body. Mysterious symbols of lightning sparkled on the surface of the arrow, and it radiated an immortal and undying aura. See, the Emperor of Death let out a groan as a wave of pain came from his soul. Wang, the dark golden crown on his head released a golden light that was accompanied by a surge of soul power. That arrow contains a soul Dao attack. The female in the dress felt a coldness in her soul, as if she could hear 10,000 bolts of lightning exploding. The Emperor of Death's soul shook slightly, as he was burned by the scarlet destruction wind lightning and God tribulation lightning. The female in the dress roared, and used this chance to break free from the Emperor of Death's control. The other two kings also struggled, but they weren't as strong as the female in the dress, so they were trapped by the tentacles of death. "Senior, save us." The female in the dress flew toward the approaching aura in despair. A male with scarlet golden wings appeared in the sky. He held the sky-locking bow, and his purple hair blew in the wind. His left eye was like purple lightning, and it seemed to be able to pierce through everything. "It's him who chased the Emperor of Death all the way here." The female in the dress couldn't believe that the aura of life was so young. The aura of this person wasn't any weaker than the Emperor of Death, and he seemed to be even more confident. The important thing was, this person was completely unharmed. The identity of the pursuer was self-evident. "Emperor of Death, I can't believe you used such a method to recover from your injuries. However, no matter what you do, the injuries caused by the God tribulation lightning will not disappear, even if you die." Zhao Feng was first shocked. Then his face turned cold under the God's spiritual eye. If it was an injury caused by a normal great emperor, then the Death Emperor would be able to heal most of it. However, an attack infused with the destruction profundity and divine tribulation lightning wasn't something that could be repaired so easily. "Ha ha ha. Zhao Feng, although my injuries haven't healed yet, my essence, qi, and spirit have recovered to their peak. Just the two of you alone aren't my match." The Emperor of Death laughed. He discovered that Zhao Feng's yuan qi had yet to fully recover. In order to chase after the Emperor of Death step by step, and not give him a chance to catch his breath, Zhao Feng's yuan qi was slightly depleted as he chased after him. Chapter 750. Zhao Feng's yuan qi was indeed slightly depleted, and he wasn't at his peak. However, this was his strategy. He didn't want to give the Emperor of Death any chance to recover. Seeing that the tentacles of death were still entangled with the other two Void God Realm Kings, Zhao Feng didn't waste any more words and immediately attacked. Gaze of the God Eye. A purple eye bloodline power surged from Zhao Feng's left eye and formed a bottomless purple whirlpool that connected to a misty purple world. A suction that targeted the soul came from the God's spiritual eye. The Emperor of Death's expression changed dramatically, and the purple and gold crown on his head released a unique undulation of soul power. The Void God Realm kings in front of him, and the experts from the two-star sects all felt their souls go cold, and they felt as if they were about to be dragged away. The closer they got to the Emperor of Death, the more uneasy and fearful they felt. The purple whirlpool in Zhao Feng's left eye became deeper and deeper, and a misty world appeared. On top of the gaze of death, there's also a unique illusionary eye technique. The Emperor of Death's heart shook. The gaze of death used the power of the soul to suck away the target's soul. Under normal situations, the winner was decided by the soul. Apart from that, there were other factors such as strong intent, mastery of the soul Tao, and technique. Zhao Feng had used a profound technique called the Tao of Illusions. Zhao Feng specialized in the Tao of Illusions, and his eye bloodline started with the Tao of Illusions, including the illusion fish picture he had seen in the Broken Moon clan. After experiencing the Fan Luan Ancient Sound Palace, Zhao Feng's understanding of the Tao of Illusions had reached a new level. According to wall painting Lu Qinxin, the highest level of the Tao of Illusions was reality. At this moment, Zhao Feng's gaze of the God eye didn't just suck away the soul. It also used the Tao of Illusions, making it even stronger. I'm the original creator of this move. How can a bastard like you do anything to me? The Emperor of Death's voice was filled with anger. However, he still needed to focus and use soul techniques to resist the gaze of the God eye. The gaze of the God eye that Zhao Feng had comprehended began to show signs of surpassing his master. This was because the medium through which Zhao Feng used this secret art, the ninth God eye, had an even greater advantage than his eye of death. What Zhao Feng lacked was the disparity in foundation. Run! The other two Void God Realm kings used this chance to escape the tentacles of death with the help of the female. Hehe. Only then did Zhao Feng's gaze of the God eye slowly stop. His true goal was to stop the Emperor of Death's tentacles of death and recover from his injuries. Heaven sealing 18 palms. The child demigod's body glowed with a golden light as the power of his sacred body crushed through the air. He thrust out golden palms that locked down the Emperor of Death. Scarlet gold eye flame. The instant the Emperor of Death was restricted, Zhao Feng's left eye released a scarlet gold light. Whoosh! A half-transparent scarlet gold flame landed on the Emperor of Death and roared through the mental energy and physical dimensions. This was the scarlet gold grade wind lightning eye flame that had merged with the power of God Tribulation lightning. The instant this flame was released, more than 300 wisps of God Tribulation lightning in Zhao Feng's purple soul sea lit up. Arg! The Emperor of Death screamed as his body was burned by the scarlet golden lightning fire. His body and soul felt like they were being bombarded. The scarlet golden eye flame contained the intent of destruction and the power of God Tribulation lightning, which was a great counter to his immortal death body. What affected him the most was his soul. This time, Zhao Feng's sky-locking bow and scarlet gold eye flame both focused on the soul. Scarlet gold wind lightning. This is the highest level of the wind lightning inheritance, Zhao Feng murmured in his heart. At this moment, his scarlet gold wind lightning had reached over 60% mastery. The scarlet gold eye flame, that was formed from the essence of the scarlet gold wind lightning true fire, was enough to severely injure most emperors. Mental energy spike. The instant the Emperor of Death revealed an opening, another purple crystal-like mental energy spike pierced into his soul. Wang, the dark golden crown on the Emperor of Death's head released a dark light, making it look like a black lotus. However, the dark golden crown didn't have the ability to block the God Tribulation lightning. The scarlet golden eye flame contained the intent of destruction and the power of the God Tribulation lightning, which had damaged the crown to a certain degree. The Emperor of Death's soul was slightly injured, and this was on top of what he had suffered last time. Emperor of Death. Injuries to the soul are even harder to recover from. Zhao Feng's smile was slightly wicked. His yuan qi had been slightly depleted, but his main focus was on his soul attacks. The body and bloodline of the 10,000 ancient races gave Zhao Feng the ability to recover, so he wasn't afraid of a long battle. Dark Eye Death Flame. The power of death in the Emperor of Death's eyes turned into a forbidden black light that shot toward Zhao Feng. Zhao Feng's heart went cold, and he felt a sense of death. The Emperor of Death rarely used soul attacks against Zhao Feng. This time, he was an exception. Wang, a layer of ice blue scales condensed on Zhao Feng's body, and a blue armor of ice appeared. A domain of ice that could freeze heaven and earth covered everything within 100 miles. Whoosh! The attack from the dark eye of death landed on Zhao Feng's body and created a sizzling sound. At the same time, Zhao Feng's purple soul sea was being corroded by a wave of black flames. Boom! Zhao Feng's left eye shook, and the 300 wisps of God tribulation lightning within his purple soul sea released a power that could intimidate gods and ghosts. Boom! The blue lake in the center of the purple soul sea started to surge. Lightning and wind intertwined in the air above the soul sea. Emperor of Death, it's useless. The difference between our souls isn't very big. A faint smile appeared on Zhao Feng's face. His god's spiritual eye was extremely resilient against soul attacks, and it still existed even against the eye of death. However, the prerequisite was that the difference between Zhao Feng and the Emperor of Death wasn't very big. Zhao Feng had the soul of an emperor, the advantage of the god's spiritual eye, and the power of the god tribulation lightning. In terms of foundation, there was still a gap between Zhao Feng and the Emperor of Death, but the strength of his soul wasn't any weaker. As I thought, the Emperor of Death wasn't surprised, and his expression became grim. He had to admit that he had met his nemesis. His biggest trump card, the Eye of Death, was suppressed by the ninth god's eye. Even his indestructible death body, which was a soul Dao power of the death system, was restrained by the god's tribulation lightning. Scarlet golden eye flame. Mental energy spike. Zhao Feng counterattacked from afar. The child demigod was in between Zhao Feng and the Emperor of Death. He used the sky ceiling 18 palms, just to restrict the Emperor of Death's movements and techniques. Boom! Shwa! Under the fierce attacks of Zhao Feng's god's spiritual eye, the Emperor of Death's face started to turn pale. In terms of mastery over the Tao of the soul, the Emperor of Death had the advantage. However, Zhao Feng's god's spiritual eye was at the level of a god's eye, and its potential was even more terrifying. More importantly, Zhao Feng's god's spiritual eye's defense against the Tao of the soul was extremely strong. In terms of physical defense, Zhao Feng had the 10,000 ancient races bloodline defense, and the Ice Imperial Spear, so he was on par with the Emperor of Death. However, in terms of recovery, Zhao Feng had the advantage. The Emperor of Death's expression changed dramatically as he finally understood why Zhao Feng dared to chase after him. Zhao Feng wasn't scared, even though his Yuan Qi hadn't fully recovered yet. This Zhao Feng's strength has basically reached the same level as mine. The only difference is our foundation. The Emperor of Death took a deep breath. This was a reality that he had to admit. Under the pressure of being chased by the Emperor of Death, Zhao Feng's growth had reached the peak of his life. Scythe of Death. A giant scythe surrounded by black mist appeared in the Emperor of Death's hand, and a terrifying power of death surrounded it. Death Force Field. A black force field appeared around him as he waved the Scythe of Death toward Zhao Feng and the child demigod. The expressions of Zhao Feng and the child demigod changed dramatically. The combination of the Scythe of Death and the Death Force Field could be said to be perfect in the physical dimension. The power of the attacks would be absorbed by the Death Force Field, or it would be boosted by the Scythe of Death. Scarlet Gold Wind Lightning. 100-yard-long scarlet gold spear appeared in Zhao Feng's hand, and it radiated an aura of destruction and god tribulation lightning. Ding! Ding! Boom! The scarlet gold spear and the Scythe of Death clashed in the air. Zhao Feng and the child demigod were forced to retreat. Sealing Yuan palm. The child demigod used a secret technique as his palm spun, and a gray-gold circle of light enveloped the area around the Emperor of Death and restricted the flow of Yuan Qi. Rumble. The battle between the two parties caused the mountains and rivers near the two-star sect to collapse and be destroyed. The powerful shockwave made the expressions of the three nearby Void God Realm kings change dramatically. Who is that purple-haired male? He's chasing after the Emperor of Death? The female in the dress and the other two kings tried to maintain their distance. The Emperor of Death and the purple-haired male both used their eye bloodlines and soul techniques. Even in a battle on the material plane, he was one of the best among the great emperors. Death Instant Shadow. The Emperor of Death suddenly turned into a dark streak of light and charged out of the inner island. So fast, the female in the dress and the other three kings exclaimed. Lightning Wings Spatial Flash. The wings of lightning behind Zhao Feng's back released a blinding light as he turned into a long arc of lightning and entered the outer dimension. His speed was obviously faster than the Emperor of Death's. The three kings were dumbfounded. When they finally reacted, they still had lingering fear in their hearts. That purple-haired youth seems to be called Zhao Feng. The number of experts that can chase after the Emperor of Death can be counted on one hand. Another expert has appeared in the Tsang Ocean. One had to know. The strength of these three Void God Realm kings was even stronger than the Saint Moon Ant Goddess and the other three kings from the Tianlu Islands. Scarlet Gold Eye Flame. Sky Locking Bow. Zhao Feng flapped his wings and flashed through the air as he chased after the Emperor of Death. Within the limitless ocean, this pursuit of death crossed many island zones and islands. Wherever the two passed, heaven and earth would change color, and mountains would shatter. At the beginning, the Emperor of Death still had the ability to fight back, but several months later, he was covered in injuries and had to focus on defense. Slowly, this unparalleled battle shook the outer realms. An unparalleled mighty figure called Left-Eyed Heavenly Lord became famous in the Tsang Ocean. Chapter 751. Half a year later, within a void ocean spiritual palace in a large island zone, whoosh! A beam of light that looked like a dark shadow pierced through the air membrane and entered the spirit hall. On the street, a man with a broken right arm and a charred black body appeared. This male wore a dark golden crown that was covered in cracks, and there was a wisp of the aura of death around him that made everyone nearby feel uneasy. It was hard to imagine that this male was an ancient emperor from the Tsang Ocean. Emperor Zimu. The Emperor of Death murmured, but no one heard him. A few breaths later, Wang, an emperor's magnificent power appeared from a certain corner of the Void Ocean spiritual palace. Emperor of Death? The surprised voice of a male sounded in the air above the spiritual palace. They saw a purple-robed middle-aged man surrounded by a layer of purple light. A strange sandalwood scent came from where he stood. Emperor Zimu. The exclamations from the outside world sounded from within the Void Ocean spiritual palace, and their eyes were filled with respect. Void God Realm emperors were extremely rare outside of the sacred lands. However, this Void Ocean spiritual palace was located in a large-sized island zone, and there were 7 or 8 two-star sects here. This was why sending a Void God Realm emperor to guard the Void Ocean spiritual palace was understandable. Emperor of Death, how did you end up like this? Emperor Zimu was surprised. He had been in seclusion for the past year or two, so he didn't know what was going on in the outside world. Emperor Zimu, you owed me a favor several thousand years ago. Now I need your help. The Emperor of Death said in a deep tone. He summarized the situation, but he didn't mention that Zhao Feng had the 9th God's Eye. The Pursuer is an expert that cultivates the Tao of Lightning, and you're an emperor that specializes in wood. You can counter him. The Emperor of Death said in a solemn tone. Techniques countered each other. For example, the Emperor of Death was countered by Zhao Feng. However, it was impossible for Zhao Feng's scarlet gold wind lightning to not be countered. An emperor that specialized in wood could counter an emperor that specialized in the Tao of Lightning. Who was that? How did he manage to chase you to this state? Could it be a sacred lord? Emperor Zimu was in disbelief. Don't worry, it's not a sacred lord. The Pursuer is just a middle-stage Void God Realm cultivator, but his cultivation technique and bloodline are special. The Emperor of Death explained Zhao Feng's situation in detail. While the two of them were conversing, swish-swish, a bolt of lightning charged into the Void Ocean spiritual palace with the brutal aura of lightning fire destruction. The newcomer was a purple-haired man with a pair of golden wings on his back. So fast. Great Emperor Zimu was astonished, even though he knew that Zhao Feng was the successor of the Wind Lightning Great Emperor. Emperor of Death, do you think that I won't dare to attack you if you hide in the Void Ocean Spiritual Palace? The lightning wings on Zhao Feng's back flapped as he looked down from above. Over the past half a year, the Emperor of Death had been completely suppressed by him. The Emperor of Death's undying body and soul had been damaged by the God Tribulation Lightning, and his battle power had decreased by 30 to 40%. The younger generation will surpass us in time. Emperor Zimu secretly sized up Zhao Feng. The aura that Zhao Feng's scarlet gold tempest emitted made him feel uneasy. Zhao Feng floated in the air. He obviously saw Emperor Zimu as well. Emperor Zimu was the same as Duan Muqing. They were both emperors of the wood element. However, there was still a certain gap between Emperor Zimu and peak emperors. Emperor Zimu, you have to help me. If you can resolve this, I'll repay you tenfold in the future. The Emperor of Death's voice contained a hint of begging. Apart from Emperor Zimu, there were 2 other peak-tier kings and 4 domain-level kings. As long as Emperor Zimu was willing to help, the Emperor of Death had a high chance of survival. Left-eyed Heavenly Emperor, that purple-haired youth, a Void God Realm King and several Origin Core realms within the Void Ocean Spiritual Palace recognized Zhao Feng. As he chased Zhao Feng through many island zones, Zhao Feng's name was gradually made known to the higher-level experts. Left-eyed Heavenly Emperor? Emperor Zimu's eyes twinkled as he hesitated. At this moment, a king within the Void Ocean Spiritual Palace messaged him and told him about the situation between Zhao Feng and the Emperor of Death. Emperor of Death, I'm sorry but I can't help you. Apparently, you fought in the Void Ocean Spiritual Palace and are wanted by the Floating Dream Sacred Land. Emperor Zimu took a deep breath and finally spoke. What? The Emperor of Death's figure flashed. Due to our past relationship, I won't take action against you. But the Void Ocean Spiritual Palace won't let you live either. Emperor Zimu's expression was solemn. The faint image of a purple and green little world appeared around him and tried to merge with heaven and earth to suppress the Emperor of Death. You, the Emperor of Death's expression was ugly. Emperor Zimu's little world was purposely targeting him, but it didn't attack Zhao Feng. Zhao Feng floated in the air and looked at everything coldly. From the looks of it, the Emperor of Death wasn't willing to leave the Void Ocean Spiritual Palace and wanted to drag Emperor Zimu and the experts of the Void Ocean Spiritual Palace down with him. Emperor of Death, you won't be able to escape today. A scarlet golden flame appeared in Zhao Feng's left eye, and it spun endlessly. Wang. Even Emperor Zimu and the other monarchs in the Spirit Palace felt a suffocating pressure, as if a calamity was brewing in the air. No! The Emperor of Death felt a sense of danger. At the same instant, 700 to 800 wisps of God Tribulation lightning within Zhao Feng's purple soul sea were connected to each other, and they radiated an undying aura that countered everything. Whoosh! A half-transparent scarlet golden lightning fire landed on the Emperor of Death, like a god's tribulation. Arg! The Emperor of Death screamed as the scarlet golden lightning fire on his immortal death body exploded and started to burn his soul dimension. He looked at the nightmarish figure in fear and despair. Only a breath or two later, the Emperor of Death's body was burnt beyond recognition, and his other arm was severed. Emperor Zimu couldn't help but take in a cold breath. The purple-haired male stood in the air with his hands behind his back and a relaxed expression. Within the Void Ocean Spiritual Palace, the other kings and Origin Core realms felt their hairs stand on end, and they didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Too strong. So that's the left-eyed Heavenly Emperor. He beat the Emperor of Death to the point where he couldn't even fight back. The Void God Realm kings within the Spiritual Palace were stunned. Emperor of Death, the power of the God Tribulation lightning I've merged into is enough to threaten sacred lords. Even peak emperors won't be able to last more than 10 breaths against me, Zhao Feng said slowly. During the pursuit of death, Zhao Feng never stopped fusing with the God Tribulation lightning, even though the pursuit had stopped for more than half a year. And now, he had absorbed 700 to 800 wisps of God Tribulation lightning in his purple soul sea. which was more than 100 times more than when he was at the pirate sacred land. Adding on the fact that Zhao Feng had unparalleled speed, he was now an unrivaled king below sacred lords. In the history of the Tao of Lightning, there was once a legendary prodigy who used the power of the god Tribulation Lightning to reach the peak of the world. That legend came from an overwhelming prodigy from the continent zone, and he eventually became a god. It seemed like the legend was about to be replicated by Zhao Feng. God Tribulation Lightning. Emperor Zimu's heart shook. He didn't choose to help the Emperor of Death at the start, because he had thought about it carefully. Firstly, the Emperor of Death was wanted by the sacred land. Secondly, an expert that could chase after the Emperor of Death wasn't someone a normal emperor like him could offend. This was especially true after he found out that the person chasing after him was a genius of the new generation. The second reason was the main reason. Therefore, Emperor Zimu didn't want to help the Emperor of Death. Thinking about it now, Emperor Zimu felt that it was a wise choice. Even though Zhao Feng hadn't even greeted Emperor Zimu since he entered the Void Ocean Spiritual Palace, Emperor Zimu didn't even look at him. He didn't even look at him. At the start, Emperor Zimu was slightly displeased. But when Zhao Feng revealed his true strength, Emperor Zimu's heart went numb, and he broke out in cold sweat. It seemed like Zhao Feng didn't even care about his existence. One more emperor, or even a peak emperor, wouldn't be able to turn the situation around. Even a peak emperor wouldn't be able to last 10 breaths against Zhao Feng. That was close. Emperor Zimu didn't think that his Tao of Wood could block the power of the god Tribulation Lightning. If he had made the wrong choice, he would have turned into a pile of ash. Emperor Zimu didn't have the Emperor of Death's indestructible body. Zhao Feng, I've lost. The Emperor of Death lay on the ground and said bitterly, I'll accept your punishment. I'll accept your punishment. What kind of humiliation did he feel when he said those words? Even Emperor Zimu and the others shuddered. Accept my punishment? You won't resist if I want your life? Zhao Feng's gaze seemed to have the power to see through one's heart. He could see the humiliation and hatred in the Emperor of Death's heart. As long as he lived, he wouldn't let this go. Furthermore, the Emperor of Death's base was within the 10,000 Forest spiritual zone. Who knew if he would gather other emperors, or even mystic light realm sacred lords to deal with Zhao Feng after he lived? Zhao Feng, you should let people go when possible. The Death Emperor's face was filled with viciousness and a hint of threat. Zhao Feng's eyes were cold and emotionless. He had to kill the Emperor of Death. This thought had never wavered. However, Zhao Feng had to prevent the Emperor of Death from counterattacking before he died. After all, he was an ancient emperor that had lived for a long time and had the eyes of death. Then let's die together. The Emperor of Death's expression twisted as he compressed the power of death into a single point and exploded. Not good, watch out. Emperor Zimu exclaimed. In a moment of desperation, he unleashed his little world to block the explosion that was enough to destroy the entire spiritual hall. The self-destruction of a great emperor was earth-shattering. Boom! The entire Void Ocean spiritual hall shook as it was enveloped by the flames of death. Emperor Zimu's little world instantly shattered. But it was only able to block 60% of the Emperor of Death's self-destruction. Emperor Zimu realized that the power of the self-destruction was 30 to 40% weaker than he had expected. Although the Void Ocean spiritual hall had turned into ruins, and more than half of the experts had died within, the Emperor of Death's little world didn't dare to underestimate him. Child's play. A youth with scarlet golden wings of lightning appeared in the limitless ocean like a god fiend. Zhao Feng dodged the self-destruction with incredible speed. At the same time, his god's spiritual eye locked onto an unremarkable black line that was rapidly flying through the air. Upon closer inspection, it was a tattered origin soul, and a pair of pitch-black eyes of death appeared within it. Sky-locking bow, soul-locking. Zhao Feng pulled the dark silver bow in his hand, and a transparent arrow made of gold and silver shot through the air. Whoosh! The origin soul, which had just escaped a few hundred miles away, was pierced by the soul-locking light arrow. It was as if it had been nailed into the void and was struggling with all its might. Chapter 752. So that's how it is. Within the Void Ocean Spiritual Palace, Emperor Zimu looked at Zhao Feng's actions and the pinned Yuan soul in the air. No wonder the Emperor of Death's self-destruction wasn't as strong as expected. The Void God realm was a transformation of the soul, and emperors had reached the peak of the Void God realm. For people like the Emperor of Death, their biggest asset was their soul. However, it was his bad luck to meet Zhao Feng. Zhao Feng's eye bloodline was also a soul type, and he had the sky-locking bow. Zhao Feng didn't let his guard down even after nailing the Emperor of Death's Yuan soul in one shot. Master! The child demigod suddenly appeared. Zhao Feng looked curiously at the child demigod. What did this little fellow suggest? The Emperor of Death's Eye of Death can be inherited through the soul. Master, can you help me steal this eye bloodline? The child demigod asked. He walked the path of a body-type cultivator, so the Tao of the soul was his weakness. However, if the child demigod could obtain the Eye of Death and use it with the golden koan sacred body, it would be a perfect combination. The Eye of Death? Zhao Feng felt his eye bloodline twitch as if it was excited. In the air, there was a pair of black eyes on the pinned Yuan soul that was in between the soul and the physical body. It was similar to Zhao Feng's god eye leaving his body. He had a feeling that the Eye of Death would be useful to him as well. Meow meow. The little thieving cat also popped its head out and waved its paws as it said something to Zhao Feng. This thieving cat? The child demigod gritted his teeth. The little thieving cat was trying to persuade Zhao Feng not to give the Eye of Death to Zhao Feng. Meow. The little thieving cat's suggestion was to kill the Emperor of Death immediately. Zhao Feng, if I die, you won't be able to live either. His soul, which had been frozen by the soul-locking light arrow, suddenly burst into flames, summoning a majestic and shocking death energy. Not good. The expressions of Zhao Feng and the others, who were approaching, changed drastically as they sensed danger. One had to know that the Emperor of Death's soul was unrivaled amongst emperors. In terms of mastery over the Tao of the soul, he surpassed some sacred lords. Meow. The little thieving cat reacted quickly and entered Zhao Feng's ancient metal ring. The child demigod wanted the Eye of Death and was caught off guard. Boom! The whole world was enveloped in darkness by the power of death that was similar to the death force field. The difference was that this power was more focused on the soul. Ah! The child demigod screamed as his soul aura extinguished, and his body fell into the limitless ocean. Zhao Feng's soul sea world also shook, suffering from the backlash of an emperor-level soul explosion. The backlash was enough to severely injure the soul of a mystic light realm sacred lord. Even someone as strong as Zhao Feng let out a muffled groan. Although his god's spiritual eye could resist soul attacks, it was only relative. If a soul attack was too strong, even the god's spiritual eye wouldn't be able to resist it. Little thieving cat, child demigod! Zhao Feng exclaimed. The little thieving cat reacted quickly and dodged the attack. Hiding inside the ancient metal ring was like entering another dimension, and there was also the protection of Zhao Feng's soul. As for the child demigod, Zhao Feng couldn't feel his soul aura anymore. Whoosh! A pair of black eyes turned into a blurry blur that was already 10,000 miles away. The Eye of Death and the intent of death. Zhao Feng's expression became grim. He didn't expect the Emperor of Death to have such a trick up his sleeve. 95% of the Emperor of Death's soul power had been destroyed in the self-explosion just now. However, his core memories and intent of death were stored in the Eye of Death. Whoosh! The Eye of Death's flying speed was extremely fast. It was in between the physical and soul states, and it was much faster than Zhao Feng's lightning wings spatial flash. This was because the speed of a normal Yuan soul would be more than 10 times faster than normal. The Emperor of Death's current state was 3 to 5 times faster than normal. Let's see how long you can last. Zhao Feng decided that he couldn't let the Emperor of Death go. Killing the Emperor of Death would be too easy. Lightning wings spatial flash. A pair of scarlet golden wings spread behind Zhao Feng's back as he flashed 10,000 miles away. He wasn't worried that the Emperor of Death would be able to escape. This was because over 95% of the Emperor of Death's soul power had been destroyed in the self-explosion, so he couldn't fly for long. The Emperor of Death only has one path of survival. Zhao Feng's heart was clear. With his body destroyed and his soul destroyed, the Emperor of Death's only path of survival was to steal someone else's body. In reality, the Emperor of Death had stolen someone else's body twice and was very experienced. However, this time, the difficulty was the highest, and the success rate was the lowest. Even the self-explosion didn't do much damage to Zhao Feng. His eye bloodline specializes in tracking, and his speed is unparalleled. The Emperor of Death's intent cursed in his heart. If it were a normal sacred lord, the Emperor of Death would have been able to escape after 2 self-explosions. The shadow of the Death God and 2 self-explosions were enough to make normal sacred lords suffer. Unfortunately, the Emperor of Death's advantage in soul power was completely countered by Zhao Feng. An hour later, the Eye of Death widened the distance between it and Zhao Feng. At this moment, the majority of its eye bloodline power had been used up, and it was flying toward a densely populated island. I can still rise again after stealing someone else's body. The Emperor of Death saw the light of new life. He didn't need to worry too much about talent if he stole someone else's body with the Eye of Death. A while later, within the imperials of a great country on an island, a dark streak flashed by. Without reaching the origin core realm, it was impossible to detect its existence. Very good. I've stolen the body of an imperial prince. The Emperor of Death was overjoyed. The strength of this great country was on par with the Canopy Great Country, so it wouldn't be easy to detect it. If it was a 1-star or 2-star sect, it would be dangerous. However, the identity of an imperial prince was a good springboard. If he entered a 1-star or 2-star sect in the future, he would have endless resources. It wouldn't take much effort. The Emperor of Death successfully took over the body of a prince that was ignored by the Emperor. More accurately speaking, it was an illegitimate child. Zhizha, even if you're trash, I'll make you go against the heavens. The Emperor of Death started to merge with the memories of this body after taking over the body. At the same time, he used a secret technique to conceal his aura. Just in case, the Emperor of Death walked out of the imperial palace and entered a quiet forest on a carriage. Suddenly, the Emperor of Death's figure froze. A purple-haired youth sat in the forest and roasted a wild boar with the thieving cat next to him. The aroma of the wild boar caused the Emperor of Death's starving body to subconsciously swallow his saliva. Zhao Feng, forgive people when possible. The Emperor of Death's breathing quickened, and his eyes were filled with despair. Apart from his powerful intent, he probably wasn't even a match for someone at the true spirit realm. Zhao Feng expressionlessly took a bite of the roasted meat and inspected the Emperor of Death's new body. Once one became a Void God Realm King, it would be extremely easy to take over a body. Zhao Feng opened his left eye, and a cold intent covered the Emperor of Death's soul. Zhao Feng was very interested in the Emperor of Death's soul Dao secret technique and the Eye of Death. Zhao Feng, if I die, you won't have a good death either. I've already set up the cursed words of death. The Emperor of Death's expression was grim and threatening. After all, he couldn't fight back against Zhao Feng. If he had to die, he wouldn't let Zhao Feng off easily. Cursed words of death. Zhao Feng's eyebrows furrowed. He had studied the secret tome of death before, but he only knew a little about the cursed words of death. The cursed words of death were the most terrifying and difficult to break curse. This was because the price of this curse was death. The cursed words of death originate from a forbidden race of the 10,000 ancient races, the Ancient Witch race. This race is ranked even higher than the Heaven's Legacy race, and is only below the Ancient race. The Emperor of Death's expression became colder. Zhao Feng's expression changed slightly, but the intent to kill the Emperor of Death didn't change. Not only did he want to kill the Emperor of Death, he also wanted to torture him and steal his Eye of Death. Ha ha ha. The Emperor of Death laughed in despair as he circulated his intent, causing his consciousness and soul to explode. His opponent was so cold and decisive that even the cursed words of death couldn't scare him away. Not good. Zhao Feng wanted to stop him, but it was too late. He didn't expect the Emperor of Death to choose to commit suicide at the last moment. The Emperor of Death's consciousness wasn't the only thing that was destroyed. The Eye of Death was also destroyed. With my death as the price, I will leave behind a nightmare of death that will wither and deteriorate endlessly for those I hate and kill. A mysterious voice pierced through the cycle of reincarnation. The Emperor of Death was already dead. The Emperor of Death's consciousness wasn't the only thing that was destroyed. The Eye of Death was also destroyed. The stronger the carrier of death was, the more powerful it would be. Theoretically speaking, the power of the cursed words of death had irreversible effects on powerhouses that were 2 ranks higher than the user. This was also why normal sacred lords didn't want to offend the Emperor of Death. He was an ancient emperor that knew all kinds of forbidden techniques. Plop! The body that the Emperor of Death had taken over fell to the ground. Zhao Feng groaned as he felt an incomprehensible power surround his body and seep into his soul. A painful and itchy feeling crawled into Zhao Feng's heart. He opened his god's spiritual eye. Zhao Feng could barely sense that wisps of black and blood-colored light had seeped into every cell in his body and even eroded his soul. The origin of these wisps of black and blood-colored light couldn't be explained. The way they existed couldn't be explained. This power was similar to the power of the cursed ghost corpses, but it was countless times stronger. The cursed words of death. This forbidden technique actually exists? Zhao Feng took a deep breath. The instant he was hit, he felt as if his entire body was covered in worms. At this moment, Zhao Feng felt his soul, body, and true yuan start to slowly regress. Luckily, his mystic ice scaled race bloodline and God's spiritual eye had a certain level of resistance against the cursed words of death. If it were a normal king, the speed at which their soul would regress would be 10 times, or even dozens of times faster than Zhao Feng's. After sitting for half a day, Zhao Feng couldn't do anything against the cursed words of death. He couldn't explain how the power of the cursed words of death existed, and he couldn't affect it with his own power. I don't understand this cursed words of death at all. I should go back to the Azure Flower continent first. Maybe the 6 Warlock Divine Sage can give me some hints. Zhao Feng made a decision as his thoughts spun. Chapter 753. In the depths of the limitless ocean, Gulu, Gulu. The sound of bubbles could be heard, and the sound of coughing could be heard. A few breaths later, a pale-faced child of 3 or 4 years of age appeared in the limitless ocean. I didn't die. The imprint on the dark heart seed disappeared. Could the Emperor of Death's soul have self-destructed? The child murmured to himself as he stood in the air. The child demigod's soul had been instantly destroyed by the self-destruction of the Emperor of Death, and his consciousness had been destroyed. At that moment, his vision went black, and he faked his death and fell into the limitless ocean. Even he thought that his soul had been destroyed, and the dark heart seed had disappeared as well. At this moment in time, the child demigod barely survived, but his soul was almost destroyed, and his aura was extremely weak. It's all thanks to the golden Kuan sacred body that a part of my consciousness is imprinted in my sacred body. The child demigod murmured. When the golden Kuan sacred body was cultivated to the late stages, it would also merge the soul with the physical body. After reaching a certain level, as long as the physical body wasn't destroyed, the soul wouldn't be destroyed easily. At this moment in time, a void ocean ship was flying over from this direction. Grandpa, what's that? A girl in a flowery dress looked at a pale-faced child. Ha ha ha. The child floated in the air and laughed wickedly. The demigod Kuan Yin, will definitely rise again and shock the Tsang Ocean. In this unassuming corner, the demigod Kuan Yin had broken through his shackles and regained his freedom. What kind of change would the unrestrained demigod Kuan Yin bring to the world? Shua! The child demigod's figure flashed and disappeared. In the next instant, cries and pleas could be heard coming from within the ship. From now on, I'm the captain of this ship. Anyone who disobeys me will be killed. The child demigod's powerful sacred body suppressed everyone present. On this ship, the strongest peak supremacy was just like an ant in front of him. After taking control of the ship, the child demigod immediately gave the order to fly in a certain direction. The child demigod knew that he definitely wasn't Zhao Feng's match. At the end of the pursuit of death, the strength that Zhao Feng displayed could threaten mystic light realm sacred lords. The child demigod decided to use his new identity and find a remote place to recover his cultivation to the mystic light realm. Otherwise, anyone below the mystic light realm would be doomed if they met Zhao Feng. Thinking about the master, who had enslaved him for many years, the child demigod was filled with hatred and fear. For the time being, he didn't dare to think about revenge. Saving his own life was the most important thing. Whoosh! The ship looked inconspicuous as it left Emperor Zimu's Void Ocean spiritual palace. In the primordial age, witchcraft and curses were absolutely terrifying powers that all the major races were terrified of. The stronger the host of the cursed words of death, the more effective they would be. The Emperor of Death was an emperor, and with the Eye of Death as its host, even demigods wouldn't be able to survive the cursed words of death. Whoosh! Zhao Feng spread his wings of lightning and landed in the nearby Void Ocean spiritual palace. Left-eyed Heavenly Emperor. The Void Ocean spiritual palace was in ruins, and Emperor Zimu was dealing with the aftermath. Zhao Feng's arrival made many people, including Emperor Zimu, tremble. Can you use the teleportation array? Zhao Feng asked. The teleportation array is protected by a powerful array, so it's safe. Emperor Zimu had a respectful expression. Zhao Feng chatted with Emperor Zimu for a bit and told him why he was here. Emperor Zimu let out a sigh of relief after learning that the Emperor of Death had been successfully killed. If the Emperor of Death wasn't dead, he would definitely remember him. Brother Zhao, don't worry. I'll help you with the teleportation array, including the one at the floating dream sacred land. Emperor Zimu was very friendly. He obviously wanted to get on the good side of a super expert like Zhao Feng, who had limitless potential. He didn't think too much about how weak Zhao Feng was. After all, the Emperor of Death was a nightmarish emperor in the Tsang Ocean. Killing him would obviously cost a lot. Great Emperor Zimu was a fence-sitter who fawned on those in power. In the Void Ocean spiritual palace, he tried to get on the good side of Zhao Feng, and even gave him gifts. He even paid for the primal crystal stones to use the teleportation array. Half a month later, with Emperor Zimu's help, Zhao Feng arrived at the floating dream sacred land. When he arrived at the floating dream sacred land, several 2-star sects and even 3-star sects invited Zhao Feng. Zhao Feng was neither overbearing nor servile, as he rejected all of them. From the floating dream sacred land, Zhao Feng used the teleportation array to go to the true martial sacred land. In order to get on the good side of Zhao Feng, Emperor Zimu once again paid a huge sum of primal crystal stones for Zhao Feng. Zhao Feng happened to be lacking primal crystal stones, so he benefited from it. Emperor Zimu was overjoyed. Zhao Feng had accepted his help and benefits, which meant that Zhao Feng owed him a favor. Before he left, Emperor Zimu asked where Zhao Feng was staying. Zhao Feng told him the mystic true sacred clan, but he didn't mention the Azure Flower continent. In the Tsang Ocean, there were 3 spiritual zones, and who knew how many islands there were? Zhao Feng didn't mention the Azure Flower continent when he was fighting outside. Even the Emperor of Death and the child demigod didn't know where Zhao Feng was born. Zhao Feng did this because he didn't want to bring trouble to his hometown. When I have time, I'll go to the mystic true sacred clan and find Brother Zhao. Emperor Zimu sent Zhao Feng off. He didn't expect that Zhao Feng didn't plan on staying at the mystic true sacred clan. After returning to the true martial sacred land, with Zhao Feng's void god realm cultivation, he could obviously use the spiritual zone array. However, Zhao Feng didn't directly teleport to the Void Ocean spiritual palace in the Azure Islands zone, or the neighboring Tianlu Islands zone. This teleportation, Zhao Feng returned to the eternally sealed Void Ocean Spiritual Palace. Back then, the reason why Zhao Feng was able to enter the true martial sacred land and meet Duan Muqing was because of the eternally sealed palace lord's help. Not long after, Zhao Feng met the eternally sealed palace lord. The younger generation will surpass us in time. In just a few years, you've already become a king of the new generation. The eternally sealed palace lord sighed. Zhao Feng felt bitter, but he couldn't say it. The cursed words of death were probably the strongest curse in the Tsang Ocean. Luckily, over the past few days, Zhao Feng tried his best to conceal his aura and not use his true yuan or soul power to prevent his cultivation from weakening. The god's spiritual eye and the ice-scaled race bloodline had an instinctive power that could suppress the power of the curse. If it wasn't for this, Zhao Feng would probably have become a withered old man, and his cultivation would have dropped to the origin core realm. Zhao Feng stayed in the eternally sealed Void Ocean Spiritual Palace for a few days. In order to thank the eternally sealed palace lord, Zhao Feng once again gave him a few peak treasures, such as the Immortal Springs wine, purple scaled grass, and some other treasures he had taken from other kings. Among them, the most precious was a spiritual fruit from the ancient dream realm. Zhao Feng could see that the eternally sealed palace lord's cultivation was infinitely close to a void god realm king. These peak treasures could help him become a king. Zhao Feng stayed in the eternally sealed Void Ocean Spiritual Palace for a few days before leaving. 1 month later, Azure Island's zone, Azure Flower Continent, whoosh! A bolt of lightning streaked across the sky like a gorgeous shooting star. A shallow crater was left where Zhao Feng landed. Where is this? Although Zhao Feng was born in the Azure Flower Continent, there were many places he had never been to before. He first checked the aura of his soul and body. Unknowingly, his cultivation had dropped to the early stages of the Void God realm. Shua! Zhao Feng then flew into the air and looked down at the terrain below, which matched the map of the Azure Flower Continent. Western Continent, Thousand Desert Great Country. Zhao Feng quickly determined where he was going to land. Skeletal Division Leader. Zhao Feng slowly spoke as a dark mist spread around him, and a silver-white skeleton appeared. Its eyes were red. After being changed by the Heaven's Legacy City, the Skeletal Division Leader's appearance had changed a lot. Master, we're at the Azure Flower Continent. The Skeletal Division Leader was overjoyed as it sensed the familiar aura from the ground. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.